It's 7:30. I'm calling the business meeting back to order. We've completed executive session with no action to report. And for purposes of everybody in the room, there are emergency evacuation directions. Please, you know what? I'm going to do the pledge first, and then we'll do the emergency evacuation. Mr. Pacini.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So emergency evacuation, just please make note of the exit signs, so in case of an emergency, you can exit safely and quickly. In addition, this is to announce that it's a smoke-free campus. No smoking anywhere on district property. And the same is true for bullying and hate. None of that on district property either. We now go to the superintendent's report.
Yes, thank you. I have a couple of announcements that I'd like to share. As of today, we have 864 known positive COVID-19 cases that have been reported in the district. I think that's only +2 since the last time we spoke. Of these 864, it includes 246 staff members and 618 students. Another topic, we just completed our pre-K registration. However, we continue to accept new registrants to our schools. To be eligible for pre-K, students must reside within the geographic boundaries of our school district and must be 4 years old on or before December 1st of the school year during which the child commences the program. We have moved up our lottery date for the full and half-day slots, and that's been moved up to June 30th. So we are happy to report that. So if you do have a preschool age child that is going to get ready to register, we ask you that you come and do that before June 15th. So we have you in our records and are able to get you into that lottery. And then finally, on Monday, April 11th, Ms. Costa and I will be at Miramar Beach Civic Association's special meeting to present the 2022-23 budget information and answer any questions that the community may have. That meeting is going to be at Hickman Fire Department from 7 to 9 p.m. And then on May 4th, immediately following our budget hearing at Bellport Middle School, we will present budget information to our PTA membership as well as community residents and answer any questions that the PTA or community may have as well. And that is all the announcements I have. President Hayes.
Okay. So, any trustee reports? Yeah.
Sure, thank you. I'd like to thank the superintendent for moving up the lottery date for pre-K. There was a problem last year with trying to schedule arrangements, so I'm glad it could be accommodated this year. Thank you. And I just wanted to thank Mr. Perano's class for inviting a number of trustees to come in to speak on the class projects that were taking place and that took place last Friday. And it's always enlightening to go into the classes and listen to the students and really hear their voices. You know, that's something I think that is encouraged here at South Country, for them to use their voices for good, and it was nice to see that in action.
I just want to echo Trustee Felice's comments. I also want to give a big kudos to our Bellport Middle School actors in their production of The Little Mermaid with director Mr. Lochner and Mrs. A. They did a phenomenal job, 3 days of it. They had 2 weeks of tech weeks. So they were very hardworking children on stage and behind the stage, and they did a phenomenal job. So kudos to all of our actors and actresses.
To me, it's the same. Mr. Perano's class was a lot of fun. It's always great to talk to students about being a board member and listen to what their concerns are. And it was fun to see the reactions when we didn't agree with them. So, but that was a lot of fun. And I did not get to see Little Mermaid, but my daughter went and said it was great. So I'm sorry I missed it.
I'd just be repeating everything, but I loved going to school that morning and work with his class for 3 sessions. And the kids were really engaged, and I think they displayed interest in what we had to say, and I echo what Mr. Bacini said. They handled it well when we did not agree with them. So, anyone else? No? No? Okay.
I just want to tag on, I was in the middle school Friday last week, and I got pulled into Generation Citizens class and questioned about the school lunches. So I'm going to be having lunch with that class sometime soon. I haven't called you yet, right?
No,
So, I said, well, seeing is believing, so why don't I come and have lunch with you also?
Or eating is believing.
But I hope it's pizza day.
I actually asked if I
Two
could
chicken
come
nuggets are
on
our
pizza
fan
day.
favorite.
But something tells me it's not going to be pizza day. Okay, ready to move on? Okay, our first item for discussion is a presentation on bonds and related capital projects during the period of 2006 to 2010. And Ms. Costa is going to make that presentation. Ms. Costa.
Hello, everybody.
How are you?
These taxes, so- Okay, these taxes. Okay. Thank you, Board of Education, Dr. Gianni, and South Country community. First presentation tonight is just us going over a history of the referendums that started back in 2005, that ended in serial bonds from 2006 to 2010, and the related capital projects. And this is really an overview so that we all have that understanding of how the bonds and the referendums turned into building aid, how building aid's calculated, and how we and how that looks today and going forward. So here's the presentation. So before the referendums, there's usually in all communities, including here, conversations with the public as to what projects are being proposed and what's going to happen. So here's an example of some of the information that was shared with the community back in 2008. There were 4 different referendum dates. And at that time, it seemed from conversations with the public that the district was aware, or the community was aware, that building aid would be paid over 15 years, and that the bonds would be conversely over 15 years. And that happened prior to the votes. So what happened after we start speaking to the public and when referendums begin? Referendums are voted on by all of our residents in the district, and they get passed, like our budget gets passed every year. So these were the 4 referendum votes that the district engaged in: 2005, 2007, 2008, 2009. They added up to $110.7 million, and those were 4 referendum votes over 5 years, and all of those passed when they went to the public for vote. So what happens after the referendum vote? There's a time period, and there's things that happen in between, from the referendums. And from the referendums, here they are. They ended up with 4 different bond issues. Those referendums made their way into 4 referendums, into 4 bond issues. As you can see from the indicated letters on the far right-hand side, the A, B, C, and D, they made their way into 4 different bond issues, not necessarily maxed one for one. They actually take bond issues out based on the pace at which the capital work is progressing in the district. So there's requirements that the bonding occurs in accordance with the pace of the work. So these are the 4 bonds that were taken out. But what happened at this time was each one of these 4 bonds were taken out for terms of 20 years. And we're not, it seemed like that the intent was 15 years, but they were all taken out for 20 years. And then we move forward from there. So what?
Just a quick question. So the term means you're paying that bond off over a 20-year span.
Yes, sorry, let me clarify the term. So yes, the term means the number of years that you're paying principal and interest payments on that debt.
And it does not reflect the kind of the pace of reimbursement you'll get on that bond.
Well, normally, we know from the state the pace at which they'll pay us the reimbursement. And the bonds that we take out, in a perfect world, would align with that. These bonds were taken out for 20 years.
But I just want to make it clear that the term does not equal, is not the same thing as how long the state will pay you back for those bonds.
We're going to get there. Building aid is paid out by capital projects, not by bonds. So that's sometimes a misconception, that people think the bonds equate to aid. The bonds don't have any equation to aid. The actual capital projects do, and we'll go over that in detail. Okay? So these 4 bonds ended up with terms or payment terms with the principal and interest over 20 years. And it appeared to be that they were advertised for 15 years. So now let's look at what was happening at that time period, just historically, as to what was happening in the district. At that time, we've spoken about it each year when we kick off our budget development cycle, where we were in 2005. And where we were is the district was in an operational deficit of $4.6 million. When you're in an operational deficit, you have no fund balance, you have no reserves, you've actually spent more than you have, and you are under New York State quarterly oversight during that period until you are released from deficit. And how do you get out of your deficit? Basically what happens here, this is a marrying of both the 4 bond issues that occurred during those years, and then we had to borrow for the operational deficit. So right in here, the yellow items that are highlighted is the intertwining of both the 4 bond issues with the deficit financing that we had to do. So in the middle of the bond issues, we had to also take out financing to finance that $4.6 million of operational deficit. We did. We began to pay back that operational deficit in 2008 and 9, and we concluded in paying off that deficit in 2010. It's just a picture of what was happening at that time period in the district, that we were in an operational deficit, and there were lots of borrowing going on, not just for capital work, but also for deficits that the district had. So now, moving past here, we're going to move into the trend, what you had asked, how building aid is actually calculated. So this is actually a picture of raw data that we received from the state of New York. There were 26 capital projects in total that were part of the referendums and the 4 bond issues that were ultimately taken out. This is just a sample of 3 of them. Obviously, it's a list of 26 different projects and the raw data. So we needed the raw data to calculate how building aid is calculated. We're actually going to go through that, and then we're going to do that as an example. So 26 projects were what were part of those 4 bond issues. And what are projects? Projects are architectural drawings that go up to the state of New York by building. So they're not, you can't send up drawings that correspond with multiple buildings, so you'd send up drawings for the middle school, for example, and they approved those drawings, and we're going to go through that, and it equates to 26 different projects.
So, but before can you just go back for a second?
Sure.
That the highlighted spot says PPU 15. Can you just explain that?
Sure, that was when I was corresponding with the state and asking them what the term is that they paid building aid over, and they highlighted PPU stands for period of probable use. And the state determines the period of probable use of the capital work you do. That is how long they think that renovation, lasts, how long a roof is going to last, how long you fix a floor, you put a turf field in. They determine the use of the work that's happening. The period of probable use is what they call it.
Okay.
Okay.
So do they tell you this before you take out a bond or after you take it out?
Well, obviously I received this after. This is their raw data.
Yeah.
During the time, lots of times if you're doing capital work, you're conversing, your architect, the district, all different people, you're conversing with the state because you have to share with them what type of work you're doing, so you would know. For example, if we look back at that information that was communicated to the public on that first flyer on the first side, they knew about 15 years because it was said in the flyer that we would get aid over 15 years. So those conversations were happening with the state, and that's a normal process. The normal process is you're talking to the state as you're developing the projects, so you have an idea over how aid would be processed. So this is just the raw data for them so that I could see what they processed 15 years ago, what they what they did, and this is from their database.
So before we take out a bond, we'll know how long that bond is payable for by the state.
You have to know what projects you're doing as part of the bond, because
Yeah.
it's not the bond, it's the projects. So yes, you will, if you know all the projects you're doing, and really you can't go forward with a referendum vote to your public, because it's part of the legal notice, to lay out all of the projects that you're going to do, because the
Mhm.
public has to be fully disclosed as to what you're doing. You don't get to say, I want to spend $100 million and I'll tell you later what we're going to spend it on.
Mhm.
It's very specific, the legal notice.
Yeah.
So yes, you would know with your architect. It takes a lot of planning before you even get to the level of bringing a referendum to the
Mhm.
floor with your public. You need to know the details of what you're going to do. Even our capital work that we were considering with our high school and our security upgrades, that was lots of meetings with our architects just to get to the level that we could talk to the board and about and the community as to what work we were doing. Okay, so this is the data from the state on the 26 projects. We're now going to unpack how this happens, how building aid is calculated. So I took one of them, the very first one listed, happens to be South Haven project, and I'm just going to go over with everyone, again, how it's not bond issues that generate aid, it's the individual projects that generate aid, and each project is looked at separately by the state. So here is the elements of one of those projects, and what I needed to do is I needed to find a loan amortization schedule that could calculate what the state did for myself, which I did, and I'm sharing it with you right here, because we're going to need to look at these together in tandem. So here's the data elements. The first data element that the state approves in red that it just highlighted on the screen is this is the cost of the project that they agree with. You send them up the data. They know when projects are bid out. They know the costs, and there are mechanisms to revise costs, but this was the cost of the South Haven project that they agreed to partner with us on. This is $1,097,000 for this South Haven renovation. So that actually becomes known as the principal when we're calculating that size. It's what the cost is of the project before interest. So now we go through, the state pays their payments to you twice a year. That's what that data element means in green. You get 2 payments a year, and that equates to, on the loan amortization calculator, 2 payments a year, like you would pay if you pay your mortgage payment twice a year. Most people pay it monthly, but in our instance, things are paid twice a year. Now we go with the interest rate. The way the state partners with school districts in the state of New York is what's called assumed interest rates. And this whole entire data element that the state has is what's called assumed amortization, is the actual legal term. They assume that 15 years, that's what you're going to do. They assume interest rates. So what is the assumed interest rate? The assumed interest rate is the average interest rate that all school districts in the state of New York have secured in the prior school year. So remember, each district can have different financial health, and financial health actually helps you get better or worse interest rates depending on your financial health. Districts with lots of reserves and fund balance enjoy better interest rates when they go and sell bonds and TANs and all those things on the open market. They get slightly better interest rates. Districts that are in fiscal stress, they have to pay more interest. It's like if you have a good credit rating, or you don't have a good credit rating at home, you pay more interest based on that. Well, they partner with us on the average interest rate for all school districts in the state of New York, and that was 4% this year. And that element is what we use in our loan calculator. The number of, the PPU, we spoke about that, that's the period of probable use. That's the time period that the state is going to partner with us to pay us the aid, which is, in their mind, the assumed term that you have. 15 years is the assumed term. They'll partner with you for 15 years worth of payments. Okay? So now what happens here is the letter A that's moving on your screen right now in the far right, that's the payment amount on the amortization calculator. That is the payment that is calculated, $49,000. And since the state pays it twice a year, each year we get $98,000. And you'll see that down below. We're looking at it yet again. The $98,000 a year, 15 times, because they're going to partner with us for 15 years, means a total amount. It's going to circle in orange right now. That total amount in orange is actually what the state will partner with us for that one project. They partner with you not just on principal, but on interest also. Okay? So that is an unpacking of how they calculate what they partner with you on. Now we're going to go forward on our calculation, because then you have to layer on top of it your building aid rate. So we're gonna do that right now. We're gonna move to the next slide. So this assumed amortization is what the state calls it, because they're giving you what they're going to partner with you on. And they assume that that is gonna happen. You can make a decision that's different than that if you want. So we took all of these data elements for 26 projects. We took the loan calculator, and literally for each project, here's the first one on top, we just unpacked it. We did the same exact job for every one of the 26 projects. You'll see as time went on, the interest rates change, because that's based on when we did the projects, and the interest rate averages in the state of New York were changing. So basically, the state partnered with us for $145 million. That actually is with interest. And that means they partnered with us for $34 million in interest on $110 million on project work. Okay? So now we're going to continue moving forward, and this is before we identify the 95% cap on our building aid. We're going to do that as we move to the next slide. So here we are. We now know what they're going to partner with us on by project right here, and that's what we just looked at in our last slide. We now need to move that into by year, okay? So to compare it to our bonds. So we used all of these items, and in part of the data elements that the state has, I'm highlighting it in red here, they talk about the years with which you're paying aid, and it's based on when the architectural plans are filed and when work begins. So every project that is different. So while we calculated the aid for each project, now we have to calculate the years for each project aid. So on the table to the right that says building aid, each building project now was now calculated, like this first project we did, took it all the way to the right, and that is now the building aid, the years that they're going to pay it to us, okay? And right here on the far right-hand column called 95% cap, that is our 95% building aid rate at that time, okay? So on the district, we take the bottom row, let's go through each column with you. On the far left, 110 million are the projects they approved. 145 million is that they would partner with us for $145 million in total. Okay? Then we applied our building aid rate of 95%. They would partner with us for $137 million of what was assumed to be $145 million borrowing. They assumed you borrowed the money for 15 years. Now we're going to keep moving forward with all those data elements. But we took out the bonds, if we took out the bonds for 15 years, this is what it would have looked like. It would have looked like the column labeled the D, the $145 million column, is what the state says would have been our borrowing amount for 15 years. They would have partnered with us for $137 million. And what would have happened on the far right-hand side, this would have been the district share amount for each year of those 15 years. And that district share, that exclusion amount, would have made its way onto our tax cap calculation every year that we did the tax cap from 2012 forward. That exclusion actually equates to $37.50 for every year additional to every taxpayer in South Country for the average assessed value if we took out 15-year bonds. That's what would have happened, okay, if we moved it forward. So now let's go forward as to what actually happened. And it actually shows it down there. The total cost over all 15 years of a 15-year bond would have been $564 to the average household in South Country over 15 years. That would be our share of that $7,254,000. That would have been our share as district, as average households. But we didn't take out 15-year bonds. We took out 20-year bonds. So here is the 20-year bonds that we took out. And you'll see in column A, which is $153 million, is the total of that column. That is the total of the payments on the bonds that we had. But the state in column B said, we're only partnering with you for $145 million, and we're only paying 95 cents on that. So just this slide is just showing that we took out bonds for $153 million, and that added $8 million in interest to the cost, and that is not shared by the state. That is a total cost to the district. But there's another element, just as we've been talking history for a couple of months now. In 2015 and 16, we refinanced these bonds. And if we hadn't refinanced these bonds, the additional interest that we took out on these bonds back when we took them out for 20 years was an additional $15.5 million. It's down to an additional $8 million now because of the refinancing of that debt. So this is what really happened, this is where we are right now, that $8 million of that cost is borne exclusively by South Country, not partnered by the state of New York. Now we're gonna marry it all together, we're gonna marry the additional interest into the mismatching of 15 and 20 years, and we're gonna see it all come together. So here's the mismatch and the additional interest and what occurred. So this is all of it put together. All of these columns are actually on all of the prior slides. They're married together, and the math follows from, we'll say from left to right. You can actually follow the math. Column 1 is what we actually did after the refinancing. $153 million is our bond payments. Column B is what the state said our bond payments would be if we took them out over 15 years, $145 million. Column C is what the state said they'd partner with us on, $137 million in building aid they would pay us. And if you continue the math across, you will see there's formulas on each of those columns, B minus A, C minus B, C minus A. They really are straight math, and it basically says that the cost to the district is $8 million in additional interest, $7 million in the blue column is the cost we always had, which was our 5% share of the building aid. And then all of that adds across to a cost to us of $15 million. But the interesting piece is the mismatch adds another element to the $15 million. So what happened here is right here in the bottom in purple, these are the years where the mismatch impact is being felt by the district. Because in the years prior to this, you can actually see in the column to the far right, the green column, you can actually see that in those years, our building aid was in excess of our bond payments. Because the state assumed we took out bonds for 15 years. And now that the building aid is ending for those projects, and they're ending over the next, we will see building aid, we've talked about it in prior meetings, building aid impact will continue for the next 5 years and 10 years, really up to 10 years. So on the far right-hand side here, this is the mismatch and the additional interest. It's both of those married together now. And so for each of these years now, we have the mismatch and the additional interest coming into play. This year, that first number, $3,000,006, is what ended up on our tax calculation, which is the cause of why our levy, maximum allowable levy, is 7.76, because as we know, and we spoke about in earlier meetings, this was from the state controller's office, and one of the exclusions right here is that you can add on to your tax calculation any costs for bonds that were taken out where there is not building aid to support them, because that is a cost
I see.
to the community. So that is what, now it doesn't start until this year was the first year it started. So that is where we are with the mismatch and the additional interest. And that is the mismatch and the additional interest actually come to an average cost to the South Country household of $1,194 is the cost borne by both of those items. And so now, I wanted to just show, I'm going to blow this up a little so we can look at it a little closer. Just added this, we had some time to calculate this. Right now this year, our maximum allowable levy increase is 776. This is the estimates of the maximum allowable levy increases for the next 10 years. Because based on this, these will be exclusions for the next 10 years while the debt is still outstanding on our books. You see in 5 years that our maximum allowable levy increase will be about 12%. This is based on the current year data points. Certain things can change, like the growth of inflation, can be minor pilot changes. But this is an estimate just so the board and community can see that this is going to be how our maximum allowable levy calculation looks for the foreseeable future.
I think it needs to be stated that this does not assume that these are going to be tax increases to the
Correct.
community over the next, 10 years.
Correct,
That's
this is the
important.
calculation, and we were surprised by the 776, obviously we'll see tonight where, the recommended levy increases, but this is what the calculation will produce approximately for the following years. Just so that we all are aware that it wasn't just this year, this will be how the calculation plays out in years to come. So now, this is really a summary of the capital projects. They were audited. This is a copy right from our annual audit report from 2015. They were audited each year. The projects were commenced in 2006. to 2015. This is the last year that they're in our audit, and I say that because they're cumulative. As you continue to do work, they continue to be in your audit. So this is the last year of our, the work for these projects, and I think the number is approximately 108 or almost $9 million was spent of the total. There was about $3 million in unspent funds in the capital projects at the end of 2015. That money has been returned to taxpayers through our budget process through the years 2016 to 2022. All of those funds, the last of them, are actually being used this year, in the year that we're sitting in. The last $574,000 is being used in this year. But all that money has been returned to the taxpayer, and that is a summary of all the projects and their audit results from 2006 to 2015. And that's the history. Any questions?
Quick question, on slide number 11.
Sure.
Just back up.
Got
Yes,
it?
that one.
Yep.
So the chart that you have over on the right-hand side, showing what the refinancing bonds in 2015 and 16 saved, it's a little hard to read that slide. Could you either change the background color and send that back out to the trustees, because every which way,
Sure.
okay, I can blow it up over here.
You get it right.
Yeah, there, I
Right.
couldn't read it here, but yeah, all right, I can. But if you could just take that chart and send that to us again?
Sure, no
That would
problem.
be helpful. And then the other chart that you showed of the maximum tax levy that Mr. Puccini commented to, that's not in our series of slides.
It isn't.
Okay. Can you send that to us as well, please? Okay.
My understanding correct, I'm trying to get this slide on the computer. So this number, the unspent, the $3.4 million, we have that, you said it was 2016
Yes. That's
through
right.
this year, and I'm sure you can provide us, unless it's in here, the amount that was put back to the taxpayers each year?
Yes.
Is that in here, buried in here, or
It's
no?
not buried in here, but I can easily provide it.
Okay, and those are the funds that were in the debt service
Correct.
fund, correct, thank you.
Is that the same slide you're referring to, Mr. Puccini?
I'm on
The
slide 13, where it has that
13.
bottom right corner, the
Because
return to taxpayers.
slide 11 is significant to show the savings of the refinancing that took place in 15, 16, which is what I wanted to highlight. There's no way you can enlarge it on that screen there, can you?
Hang on.
Okay. I just thought it would be helpful to see it on the screen. All right, well, you don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but.
Cameron,
I've
you're
never
able
gone
to
to
enlarge
this
it,
one.
right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, my screen,
Hang on, I can bring a
So
picture
am
of
I.
it.
I
Yeah,
just wanted to show
that's
you. if you
exactly
did
what I was
it.
thinking.
Ready?
There we go.
I would maybe.
Maybe make a new slide so you're not
Just copy
overlaying,
that
can
and
you
put
do
it
that
to
or
the
no?
slide.
Okay, yeah, that helps,
Hang on,
thank
Bring
you.
it over a little bit more for you.
Gotcha.
There you go. Is that
Yeah,
better?
yes. You're right, the background design was distracting.
So this is, what I do, this big here. Just trying to see so you can see it better. I know it's not working, so I think.
No, that's
Okay.
good, that's great, thank you. So my question is, the $4.1 million savings, in the refinancing. Does that come off the 15 million that you spoke of?
Yes.
It does, okay.
That's why now the additional interest cost is 8 million. So it was originally
Instead of the
15.5. We saved 7 million and change, and we're now at 8 million.
So the saving is more than the
It's
4.1,
the
or do you
two
add the
numbers,
two?
It's the two together.
That's my
that
question,
the
you add the
savings.
two,
Two
and that- that get up.
refinances, 15 and 16.
There were 4 bonds. Two of them were refinanced into one bond, and 2 of them were refinanced in another. That's why you're seeing them as 2 separate tables.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions on that presentation?
I do have one, and I don't know if it's an easy explanation, but it certainly is the topic in the community was, how does the mismatch go unnoticed for so long? Right, that's the number one question I think as trustees will get, right? You refinanced, how come you didn't see? Can you maybe give us a minute on how, because I mean, we see it because we've been engrossed in this, but somebody who's just tuning in or is half paying attention doesn't really understand that there's, the building aid payments is all the way over here, it's divided up into 6 projects, and then the bond payments is all the way over here, because the question everybody always says is, well, it's like your mortgage, right? You have a principal and interest, and you have payments, and you see the amortization schedule. I think the disconnect is that the building aid from the state is nowhere referenced in that. They're 2 separate things, correct? One doesn't really, it has something to do with the other, but they're not referenced together by each entity.
Yeah, that's actually, historically, the law changed in 2001 that mandated assumed amortization for all capital work. It was because prior to 2001, the state partnered with districts any way that they financed their projects. That's how they partnered with them. And the state realized that that's not really a useful use of taxpayer money, that people could make whatever decision they wanted, so they wanted standardization. So it was very common in 2001 that it's kind of like, there's an analogy out there that it's kind of like the mask mandate of today. Like, everybody knew that assumed amortization was how the state paid some of these, how they decided to pay debt service. The building aid on your, related to bonded work. But your particular question is how it doesn't go noticed. Well, let me first say that of the 26 projects, if you notice, one of the data elements was all the years that building aid is paid.
Mhm.
Building aid is usually paid, this is a generalization, but about 18 months after you even bid the jobs out. So there can be a significant time from referendum to bond to project.
Mhm.
First of all, there's a significant time, it's not immediate. It's not even at the same time at all. In speaking with bond counsel regarding refinancing, when you're talking about when you might have been aware if something happened 15 years ago and then you weren't aware later when you refinanced, what they did share is it's very unlikely, like they can't say it never happened, but you never refinance your debt for a different term than you took it out for originally. You have to prove to the controller's office that there's a savings related to that bonded debt, there's a savings. And lots of times the savings isn't realized and they have to give it a blessing to move forward to refinance it because they don't want you to go to your taxpayers, incur, there's a lot of cost to refinance debt. It goes to lawyers, goes to fiscal advisors, goes to a lot of people. So the controller's office wants to make sure that some of that savings actually is borne by the taxpayer in the community, not just everybody else gets paid and we don't get our share savings. But one of the ways that happens, bond counsel shared, is it's very unusual for a term to ever be shortened and them to approve it because there isn't enough savings then built in. And it's usually just taking care of interest rates that are declining. So that's not a great, that is the answer for why during a refinancing it's maybe not noticed. It's really not the norm on how refinance debt occurs.
So.
They're looking at just the bonds.
And I get, okay, but I do get that, but back when these bonds were refinanced, and I'm really talking about business officials from 16 and prior,
Yeah.
right? We had 2 separate business officials that refinanced, 15 and 16, it was 2 different people, and then there was somebody else before that, and then somebody else, I think, was there at the beginning of the bonds, and I think it changed over. To the point, to the earlier business officials, and you said, and even those that refinanced it, you said it was like the mask mandate. Everybody knew these projects were aidable for 15 years.
Well, let me add something to that.
Okay,
They're aidable for 15, 20, or 30 years.
okay. So, because I knew you were gonna say that. So, I guess should it have been a red flag when it was refinanced to say, well, these are 20, but we know that building aid really should be 15, knowing that it could be 20 and 30, and I think that has to do with the project, right? 20 and 30-year bonds are typically new construction buildings, not necessarily repair work.
It's a little more, yes, it's a little more.
I'm sure it's more complicated than that, but I'm trying to keep it as easy as
We
possible.
could have
because-
easily had in our 26 projects, half of them in 20 years and half of them in 15, depending
Sure.
on the work we did. That is not our case. Our case is 15 years for all.
It's 15 years for all, I guess.
All 26.
But what I'm getting at is that, like you said, those, at that time, the business official, it was, why did they not recognize it's 20? Why did it not set off a red flag back then?
That answer.
Okay. And that's kind of where I think I struggle, I think some community members struggle when we think about that, right? Obviously, there was a decision made to go 20 years, so I have to think the business official at that time knew what we'd be facing today.
Well, let's just
That's
say
my
one-
assumption.
Let's say one thing, remember when I showed the slide, the financial statements, and the last time that the 26 projects were presented on the financial statements, the last time they were even on the radar of the district, that these projects even existed or happened, was in 2015. That was the last time they were shown on any report or anything that anyone even knew there were 26 projects kind of out there.
I'm sorry, a report from who, though?
Let me see if I can bring it back up.
You mean the one that had the yellow highlights on it from the
The
state?
very last slide, the very last slide, that was, I don't have my little thing.
The one with the green on the bottom, this one,
Delete it?
the green one?
That one, correct.
Okay, so,
That slide is actually from our audit report. Look at the top and.
yeah, no, I see it, from 2015 audit report, okay.
Okay, that is the last time it ever was presented in our audit report. So from 2015 forward after that, those projects, if I was to show you the 2016 audit report, that
This
page is
is
pretty
big.
much blank.
Okay, and why is that? What would
Because the
prompt the auditors
project-
not to put that on that?
Because the projects had finished and all the work had been done, and they really were, we'll call it old news, that they weren't.
Okay, so
they
it's
weren't being audited
assumed
anymore.
that prior was handled properly, there's no
Yes.
reason to keep reviewing something that's been reviewed and should have gone through the steps. And I ask these questions because I think the biggest misunderstanding in the community is, how did it go unchecked? And I think there's just such a general misunderstanding of it, and that's why I keep pestering.
Yeah, and just so the board is aware, we're aware of, bond council, we're not, currently this year, we're aware of 4 districts in the exact same position of us this year that have had the same year we took out bonds, 20-year bonds, a 15-year period of probable use. They all have that. One's our neighbor right here, and they're having the same situation as us, maybe not as visible, but they're having the same situation as us. So we know of 4 districts in the exact same position because the state does not get involved in the term with which you take out your bonds.
Sure.
Only the term with which they will partner with you on and the amount of money they will partner with you on. They do not get involved in the term.
And would you say that the size of these bonds has exacerbated the whole thing, right?
The reason we only know about 4 is because those 4 had building aid rates that I would say are 80% or greater, like ours was 95%. I pulled up.
Okay, so it's not as big a drop-off for some neighborhoods.
We know the big ones. I happen to know a couple of, research I've done personally. I can see districts, I follow their budget reports, I can see districts that have had drop-off of building aid, and their debt service has not changed in their budget at all, but it's for minor amounts, it's not for 95% on $110 million in work. We've had this conversation, which is that the unusualness of the size of the work that we did at that time. At that time, our budget was only $80 million. To take a, it's, and you all know I'm a data person, it's very common speaking to fiscal advisors, bond counsel, I like to ask data questions, and a normal large amount of work to a district to undertake is about half of the size of your budget, is really a lot of work. So we took on work that was well in excess of 100% of our budget at the time. And so those are large amounts of money, and we had a building aid rate at 95% at that time. So that alone, so that exacerbates any mismatch. Obviously, the size of the work added to the additional interest payment, because the larger you're borrowing for, the more interest you're gonna have. Those things all married together to create what we're in now. But I believe that there are, according to bond counsel, many districts still today decide to take out 20-year debt, knowing that the state is only going to partner with them for 15 years. That is a common thing that still happens today, they say.
On purpose or?
On purpose.
On purpose.
They do it because their building aid rate could be 26%.
Well, I see what you're saying,
Do you
yeah.
understand? They make the decision based on the specifics of their financial situation. Like districts that have a 26% building aid rate, any drop in building aid is not going to be that great. They make the decision. They look at their life, long-term financial plan. They make it. The grandness of the things that we were engaging in back then were grand. And having a 95% building aid rate means that, you know, we had to be pretty sure, because in year 16, this problem, you know, was cemented in stone on year 1, because there was no unraveling. Like, it's fun, you know, we talked, like, in bond counsel, we were talking about things like, the minute you sell your debt on the open market, there's no way to get those bonds back. Like, we incurred that additional $15 million in interest the day we sold those bonds. There was no getting out of that. The only getting out of the $15 million in interest was the refinancing years later. That's the only way we could have mitigated the interest, was to refinance. And that still ended up being an additional $8 million in interest in the end, which the state is like, that has nothing to do with us, that's you. It doesn't have anything to do
We
with
made that
us.
decision, sure. Okay.
But in a district that only gets 15% building aid, 20% building aid, they're maybe willing to go out longer and do things differently. When you get 95% building aid, you need to be extra careful about how things are aligned, or you're going to be where we are.
And in our case, now that we do know, there have been steps taken within your office so that the transmittal of this type of information will go forward, and future boards are not going to be in the position that we were put in to have this problem land on our desk to deal with.
Absolutely. Not only have we worked on some of them already, even through our budget process, we see the long-range financial plan, and we won't really enter into budget conversations without that. And in our district now, building aid is broken out in a separate line on that. Just so you know, this template is very much, you know, can be something that districts use, but nobody breaks out building aid separately. Well, in our district, we break out building aid separately now. We will know building aid till the end of time. It is not concluded in our state aid. It is its own life and its own world. And that will continue hopefully in perpetuity. And in addition to that, because the board has brought it up, we've already started RFPing certain, you know, we're going to go out on the street with RFPs from some of our professional service providers. And part of the specs that we're going to build into those RFPs are some measurable deliverables that they have to provide to the district, but not just to the business office. They have to deliver them to the board every year at a certain time to give reports so that they're going to more than one place and where they should go. So everyone has the data. I mean, right now we don't have any bonds that are outstanding. We know what the next 10 years of our bonds look like. But when we get to the point where we take out bonds in the future, hopefully, you know, the way most request for proposal documents work is districts use them year after year. So if you build it well in the beginning and you build the right specs in and the right deliverables, it will just continue in perpetuity, and the contract will address those. So yeah, that's how we are building some fail-safes into the future.
And in addition to that, one of the things that the board is doing is causing there to be a review of policies that are in place. And my goal would be to have a policy that basically says you don't advertise something to the public and then change it without notice. And I'm looking forward to getting that into place again so that future boards and future voting opportunities are not surprised by things like this. And I think that goes to the heart of the whole transparency issue that we've been talking about, of disclosing things like this, and we want to make sure that whatever information goes out is accurate.
Absolutely.
Ms. Costa, question, and this is for me personally, because I don't want to have to deal with this tomorrow morning when I go out. Return to taxpayers from 2016 to 2022.
Yes.
There's a certain amount of money that we have listed here. Tell us how that money was paid to the taxpayers.
So when we build our budget, we're actually, I can actually show you, I'll point it out to you when we do the next presentation, because you're gonna see it in there. But each year, when we build our budget, we start out with our revenues, which includes our sources of reserves and fund balance. And then that has to equal our expenses. That's how we balance our budget every year. One of the revenue sources that we've had over the last number of years is a transfer from the debt service fund. So from 2016 through this year, we transferred money. It was approximately $600,000 a year. This year is $574,000, only because that's what remains. That is the last of it. So we returned it in a scheduled, methodical way, because you want to try and return it to revenue source. If you use it all in 1 year, you don't have it the next year. You want to try and give it back a little bit at a time. So it's been given back over all those years, and we have, this is the last year of that.
I noticed on one of your slides, it indicated that had the bond payment term been lined up with the building aid term, the average homeowner during that entire period would have been responsible for about $1,200 total?
Yes, it looked like $1,194. Yep, $1,200.
Which never got billed out in taxes to anybody. So if I'm the average homeowner, I didn't pay that $1,200 during that period.
Yeah,
Is
let me
there-
bring that slide up. Dan, can I bring, I can't get to the presentation. I think I X'd out and that was deleting it. Okay. Here I am. Thank you. Okay, so let me show you quickly what you're talking about. So from this slide, we talked about, there it is, it's just a delay. I always think that there's something wrong, but it's just taking a while. Okay, this is the slide that if we took out the bond for 15 years, this is what would have happened to our district. And beginning right here in the red area that I've highlighted, that was the beginning of the tax cap calculation in 2011 and 12. So in 2011 and 12, we would have been adding on to our tax cap calculation an exclusion every year for these amounts. I'll use the $483, which is that's pretty much what the number is. That $483 comes to $37 a household every year that we have the bond issue. And that's really what would have happened each of those years. I did a very quick calculation, and I'm remembering this off the top of my head, so if it's not exact, forgive me, but it's about this. When we did our tax levy limit calculation this year, it was 229. If you all remember that, it was 2.29. If we would have been aligned, our tax cap calculation this year would have been something like 2.58. That would have been the number if we had taken out 15-year bonds back then. Okay? That's because you only can put on your exclusion, that which is not supported by building aid. So there's no opportunity, right now to do, this is the first year. But this is what would have happened if we aligned our bonds to 15 years. Okay? But here's what did happen. And when I say this is what did happen, if you notice in the yellow column, the first 15 years, those positive numbers in that column, those positive numbers are the additional building aid. Remember, the additional building aid comes to us in the form of, on the state aid run, it's one number of our state aid, but it was part of our state aid those years. So we were paying bond issues, we can just use last year as an example, of about $7.3 million, and we got building aid of $9.6 million once we unpacked the 26 projects. Once we figured out how much it was, this is what we got to. So there was no ability to get anything from the taxpayer, for your question, because there was no exclusion we could put on. Unfortunately, this misalignment makes us get from our taxpayers, the last slide said it would have cost our taxpayers right here on the bottom right, $564 would have been what we collected from our taxpayers over the life of a 15-year bond. But remember, we took out a 20-year bond, so we have to pay this $564,000 plus the additional $8 million in interest. That's 100% on us. And that, we're only able to start collecting that now, if you consider the way you can collect it is through the tax cap calculations, is right here at the bottom. That is a cost to the average taxpayer of, hold on, next slide, right here, $1,194 is what we'd be collecting, but unfortunately, that money is only in the next 10 years. In the first 15 years, we couldn't collect anything. So here we are, now our cost is $1,194 for these bonds for our average household,
Cumulative.
cumulatively. And you're right, to date, we had no ability to ask for any, nor have we collected any. And then that's where we are, right here in that position right now.
Pretty good.
Thank you.
Move on to our next. Our next item for discussion is our sixth in a series of budget presentations, and it is specific to expenses and revenues. We are happy to report that this evening administration will be recommending a spending plan with a 1.75% tax levy increase, below the Long Island average of 1.9 and far below our maximum allowable tax levy at 7.76%. And Ms. Costi will make that presentation as well.
Thank you, Dr. Gianni. Hello again, Board of Education. And the South Country community. So here we are. This is the meeting we do. These are workshop meetings. We do our expense and revenue update. And here we go. Here's our budget development calendar. The notable item here on the budget development calendar, since our last meeting, we needed to start advertising our 4 times our legal notice. Our legal notice is being published in the Long Island Advance and the South Shore Press on the following dates that are indicated. And first publication is today and tomorrow. South Shore Press today, Long Island Advance tomorrow, and it will be published 3 more times. Additionally, here we are tonight. We're going to get an update of where we are. We're going to look at state aid. We're going to do an update of state aid. It's really not a big update because you don't have state aid here, but we'll talk about that in more detail. We're going to update our expenditures, and we're going to, administration is going to recommend a levy increase to the Board of Education. So what will we cover today? We'll do a state aid update. We're going to look at our budget gap that we use as we develop the budget. We're going to do our tax levy increase recommendation from the administration to the Board of Education. We're going to look at our long-range financial plan because we don't do a budget presentation without it anymore. And it's a good practice. And we're going to talk about next steps for the Board of Education. And here's our guiding visual through the process. It is our balanced triangle, revenues and expenditures for our educational program, and they all balance at the end of our process. So here we go. So our recommended budget from administration. Recommended budget is program-driven. Staff reductions that we will see this year are a result of declining enrollment. Elementary class size guidelines have been preserved. Our projected class size ranges are 17 to 24 students per class. There's been no change in academic programs, no change in finding performing art programs, no change in interscholastic athletic programs. We have continued support, intervention supports for our K-12 students, and our current budget includes 3 contingent positions.
Before you move off this slide,
Sure.
are you going to identify the contingent positions? Because I wasn't able to decipher where they are throughout the rest of the presentation.
So funds are available to provide for growth, whether it's in enrollment.
So that's just
The money.
insurance?
Insurance, so to speak.
I'll explain it a little bit on this slide. So basically, the staffing summary shows a reduction of 19.6 FTEs, and those are in those various areas. And the 3 contingent positions means that while the people reduction has been 19.6, the money in the budget has only been reduced by 16.6.
So how did you come up with 3? Why wasn't it 6, or why wasn't it 1? How did you come up with 3?
Experience, So we look at where when we look at our projections and where we're sitting, we expect that we may need 3 based on growth. Our class sizes at the elementary level are relatively low. In fact, we moved, I think, 2 positions in since our last meeting, which brought those 25s down to 24. So we don't expect any more growth at the elementary levels. We think we can handle that. Those 3 contingents more than likely would be at the secondary level.
And that's if class sizes go over 25?
Well, class size at the secondary level is a little different. It's under 15 and over 25. But those numbers would generally be split up in terms of points, right? Because if you remember the presentation in secondary, it's not a classroom, the teacher teaches a course. So it may be a point here, a point there, it might be a whole person. But that's not to preclude that it may be a whole person somewhere else.
Okay, so you put it in the budget, so you have it there as a cushion, but it could be used, it may not be used.
Correct, it may not be used.
And when will we know if it is used? I guess with the personnel
September.
report when we hire?
September. Yeah, usually September when we begin running the classes and courses.
Okay, thank you.
Is there an average of how many contingents you put in each year, or is it just completely fluctuating?
It depends. One year we had a rather drastic reduction and we had some higher class sizes and we had 5. One year we had 1. So it's really it's administration trying to project where you are and where you might go based on the growth that we generally see over time. 3 is a good number for this budget. We're pretty confident with 3 that we won't be using anymore.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so this is bringing us to our updated projected expenditures. And if you see that our current expenditure level is $142.4 million, that is a 2.06% reduction, or $2,991,000 reduction from last year. We spoke about that. Budgeting to actuals, we spoke about the pandemic and some of the extra, monies that we've had pandemic related, and we have made related adjustments. And this is a summary of where we were each stage of the budget process. So we started our first look at expenditures or our spending plan at $145.1 million. In that meeting, we started, and the next meeting, we made about $2.3 million in reductions, and those are the details there. We ended on March 2nd with a $142.8 million budget. And then for our March 16th meeting, we made another $357,000 in reductions. We ended our March 16th meeting at $142.4 million. And between last meeting and this meeting, we've added $31,000 in costs. Those are BTA contractual obligations.
I'm sorry, repeat that again? They are what?
BTA contractual obligations for teachers who qualify for lane changes or educational increments, that they receive additional education, and we will have to pay those monies next year. So we end this budget at $142.5 million, and that's the summary of our meeting.
So at the last meeting, I'll direct this to the superintendent. At the last meeting, you asked us for ideas in which we wanted you to look back at the budget for more efficiencies. And then you asked us to send you an email on other efficiencies you wanted you to look at. Is that included in this projection right now?
So I got no direction. I walked away with no direction from the entire board. So I did not add anything that any individual trustee might have sent me.
Okay. But that was the direction between meetings to bring.
That wasn't what I walked away with. My request was for the board at the table to give direction to administration.
So none of those considerations, none of those suggestions were taken into consideration for this. The only thing that has changed with this budget is the additional revenues that you're building back in because of the federal monies.
No, I don't have your email in front of me, Ms. Felice, but I do recall you asked something to do with the class size. That projection was something we were already looking at, and we did address that, but it wasn't a result of the email. It was a result of just simply continually looking at the projections as we move along through the process.
Well, it was about, one of them was about our legal expenses, which you did address
That was something council had offered before
before the suggestion was made.
Oh, yes, it was before. I just reported it in the update.
So if they made that suggestion before, why was an increase put into one of the previous presentations?
Why wasn't
An increase for the legal retainer and their additional work?
I don't know if there
Was
was
put in
one
there.
in there or not.
It was, I don't have it readily available, but, all right, I'll save the rest of my questions till the end. Thank you.
I'm glad to have a little extra there because I've had in mind some things that I think we might want to have council advise us on in the next year. Because, for example, we have not been getting regularly attended advice on issues like how, if in any way, zoning issues in the district could affect, the schools, how the IDA and pilot projects might affect the schools, the impact of drop-off of pilots that may be coming down the pike not too long from now. And I'm glad to hear that money is still there so that we can retain
No, I
counsel.
didn't want the money taken away. Please don't misunderstand me. What I was looking at is that year after year, there was a built-in raise for the attorneys, and I just didn't think it was necessary. At the time that we had these conversations, we were looking at a very significant shortfall. And what I had suggested was that we need to do a better job at communicating to the community of what we're talking about, which we did. And the letter, it still hasn't arrived at my house, so I don't know when it was mailed out. I hope it gets to the community soon. And I wish it had gone out the 4 weeks ago when we first talked about
I
it.
got it today.
You got it today? I didn't get it today. So, but at any rate, I just lost my train of thought. What I'm saying is, I wanted to make I wanted our district to make a grander gesture to the community that we're tightening our belts and that we're looking at this budget and these numbers, which are huge, as ways that we could find more efficiencies. I suggested looking into supplies, looking into equipment, and if there were ways we could trim a percentage or two off of those costs, it would bring the budget down. Just because we can levy a tax increase doesn't mean that we should. And since we started out at 7.76% and now we're down to 1.75, doesn't mean we should stop there. If there's more efficiencies we can put into place, why wouldn't we? And I'm on the, you mentioned the controller, the New York State Controller, and the advice that you get from the controller. And I'm on his website when he does the 5-year audits for municipalities. So those reports come through. So there was one that came through today for a municipality, a fire district, Copeg Fire District. And there were numerous sightings of irregularities. And one of the conclusions that was stated by the State Controller's Office, what they wrote, is when the board fails to conduct a thorough and deliberate examination of each individual claim and the supporting documentation, it does not have enough information to determine whether the claims represent valid expenditures. That's why I said we have to be a little more diligent with our treasurer's report and looking at all of those expenses. And I'm not making any accusations. I'm just saying, we don't have enough information at this point to prove that we have done that. And I want to get to that point that we can confidently tell our community we've sharpened our pencils and we've looked at every aspect of this budget for efficiencies, that we don't have to pass on these costs to the taxpayers. Because it's year after year, it's a constant burden. And some of the issues that were raised in this particular report were expenditures at automotive repair shops for cars that the district doesn't even own. And somehow, their offices missed that,
Was
and I'm
that
not
in the
saying.
That's another district.
It's another district, yes, it's another district. No, I'm saying it's another district, and so these are the things that I want to be assured of, and I want to trust that's happening. So when you tell me, when we sit here in a meeting till 11:30 that night, we sat at a meeting, and for you to tell this board right now that you didn't get clear direction from the board of what we wanted to see you sharpen your pencil on, I think it's a disservice to this board, and I think it's a disservice to this community. And I'm disappointed that you said that.
I have a different view of this because I'm looking at the overall picture and I'm seeing a budget comparison to last year with cuts that are over 2% from last year, which, given that this budget had to have inflation taken into account for some of the anticipated expenses over the next year, like the transportation, for example. Even with the recognition that we're not going to be doing the replenishment of reserves the way we've been able to over the last few years, it'll be somewhat reduced. That, to me, is still a good cost-cutting, and I am assured, because I've asked this several times, that what this budget does is it preserves all the programs and all the services for the children that we currently have. So it's without cutting any of those. Is that correct?
That's accurate, and I don't want the board to think that we did not go into this process without sharpened pencils, because there were a lot of things that administration requested and did not get, whether it was equipment or supplies. We did that at the very beginning, This is a tight budget with all the efficiencies we can do without cutting programs. So those things were all done as the normal part of the budget process.
Well, for example, to expand on something Dr. Johnny just said about equipment, we've had some of our large equipment budget builders come to us with large requests for equipment. And given the situation that we're in the foreseeable future, we 1 year in the past had cut all equipment from the budget. And we sat and spoke about it as cabinet, that was really a difficult year because you cannot buy some things that are over $500, like an air conditioner for a student who has an IEP. We're precluded from buying it if it's over $500 and we have no equipment. So that was a very difficult business decision. And what has happened now is, even though people asked for a lot of things, we discussed that we would have conversations with them, that a reasonable amount of equipment each year going forward that we can support is what the district really should have. It shouldn't have that you have a $100,000 request this year, and every year it's like that. We built in reasonable amounts for each department that weren't just what they asked for, and explained to them that you may only be able to buy a certain number of MacBooks this year, and then you have to buy a certain amount of MacBooks next year. And that's how we're going to have to be prudent and also address the student needs. And that's kind of some of the conversations we had, because the budget builders don't always understand the constraints we have of the whole budget and some of those long-term perspectives that you have. What can we support? That's not over, that's community palatable. And I think that we did do that on numerous occasions, and some people asked for additional programs and staffing, and we were, we had to say, that's not something we can support. That's not something we can even go forward to the board and the community and say, let's add that. There wasn't a lot of adds in this budget, because only the things that were absolutely necessary were the adds. And I just want to say one other consideration for the board. We're still coming out of the pandemic, and some of the norms as to what we need for some of the expenditures in large areas, from facilities to transportation, over time, and some of those areas are still very fluid. And while we've made adjustments this year in the budget, that's what we really did a lot this year, we're still waiting to have completely normal operations, so we start to see our normalized costs so that we can continue to do what Ms. Felice says, is to bring things down to a level, but I'm not sure we're sure exactly what normal is yet. And we continue to notch at that normal, but that's what our goal is to make sure that we are, can support our program and our needs as we come out of the pandemic.
And to that point, one of the things that I noticed, that we are cutting a couple of, through attrition, some of our math specialists. One of the things, I know that we're moving from RTI to possibly MTSS. If we can put some of those bodies, if we find come September, that we're not needing them, into the math specialists, because due to the pandemic, we're gonna be needing that right there. So I just happen to notice 4 of those specialists, through attrition are not there, and those are the ones that are gonna be servicing our high-risk students.
Okay, want to continue? Okay. So here we are, this is the slide that we've been talking about as we've built the budget. These are scenarios that the board can see where we were. We began with our tax cap calculation coming in at a maximum allowable tax levy at 776. We quickly showed other scenarios at 5%, 4%, and 2.29%, which was 2.29%, as a reminder, was our tax levy limit before the exclusions for our building aid and debt service payments. And then we quickly in the process moved off of 776. We saw that early on in our budget development process that we wouldn't need to go out for, that was a maximum allowable. We didn't need to go out for 776. And here tonight, we're going to talk about administration's recommendation. And administration's recommendation takes the 5%, 4%, and 2.29% scenarios off the table also. So here we go. We're going to talk about recommended tax levy increase of 1.75%. So on the left, you see last year's budget. On the right, you see the recommended. Mr. Barker, you see the line item on the left that says transfer debt service? That is the last of the give back of the money from the bond issues, that $3 million. This is the last. And each year going backwards, that's how it was presented as we built the budget. So on the right is the recommended 1.75% levy. These are the things we don't know about. We're still waiting for final state aid amounts. They're due April 1st. If you followed any of the one budget releases from the House and the Senate, New York State House and Senate, you'll see that they are very much aligned to Governor Hochul's proposal, with very little indication that there may be much movement off of what those original executive runs were. So if you read them in detail, there's usually a lot of wrangling. Everyone seems to be working very well together this year, and it seems like those will be the numbers that might come forward, but we'll probably see a little bit of change. But here is how we were able to recommend a levy increase of 1.75. We are recommending to the board that we would revise our federal grant spending plan. And that would result in an annual increase to the average household in South Country schools of $108.35. That would be an increase to the average household. So let's unpack what happened with the revised federal grant spending plan. So this is, let's talk about what we're recommending. This was the original federal spending plan recommendation last year, when we got notice about the same time last year that the federal dollars were going to come to us in the form of CRISA and ARP. ARP is also known as rescue funds. The period use is the years that you can use the grant funding. It's identified up there, and they're different for both CRISA and ARP, and each of those plans are actually different. We assumed that we would use $5.9 million this year, 4.5 next year. Next year is the budget we're building, and $2.4 million in the final year. And that was our original plan. Here is our revised plan. Our revised plan is that we'd be using $2 million this year, $6.5 million next year, and $4.4 million in the last year. And that is a change. Basically, that is $4 million being used this year would be pushed to both 22-23 and 23-24. And just to give everybody a little bit of insight, this is what it would do. It would close our budget gap with no further reduction. It improves our long-range financial plan flexibility in 23-24, which is the budget we will be building after this one. And it improves our reserves versus appropriated fund balance outlook. I'm going to talk about that in detail. I'm even going to talk about how it came about. So really it came about, we're going to look, this is our long-range financial plan. This is with the original use of federal dollars before the recommendation we're making to the board. And what this is this was our original use. It's highlighted in red up above. Those were the years and the amounts we were going to use. To actually build the long-range financial plan, you have to build where you're going to be this year, prior years, and obviously we know we're projecting out years. We do know we have savings this year in the budget. We've been talking about it well before the budget development process started. It's really related to pandemic-related issues, hiring, transportation. We know we've gotten federal monies for, federal monies for our Chromebooks this year. We've gotten money after school program we didn't need. There's been a lot of savings this year in the budget, one-time savings. We anticipated coming into this year, at the closing of this year, with approximately $6 million that we'd be adding to reserves. And you see where that would flow on the long-range financial plan. It literally flows into, you see the top line at the bottom says 31 million would be our fund equity at the beginning, 37 million is our fund equity at the end of the year, and of that 37 million, 26 million would be in reserves. And I'll say this, reserves are your friend, but they're not your best friend. Because reserves, it's great to have reserves, but they do tie your hands. You can only use them for expenses that you currently have. So even though you have reserves, you can't just use them any way you want. So there is some inflexibility with reserves. So here is where we would look when we start to run into fiscal challenges in the 2026 year, 25-26 year. If you actually see there, the number in red, $7.8 million, that would be our fund, that is our unrestricted fund balance. That's actually what we use each year in our budget. When we give $4 million back into the budget process every year, we wouldn't be able to do that. We wouldn't be able to do that to the tune of $7 million. So we would have fiscal challenges that year. So what the revised plan does is, and you can always use a little bit more reserves, but not many, because we've spoken about in the past, you have to have the corresponding expense to use the reserve. You can't just use it for anything you want. So if you don't have ERS expenses coming that you're going to pay, you can't use the money even though you have an ERS reserve. So actually it is the long-range financial plan that helped me think, let me start talking to the state and see if there's something we can do. So I spoke to all the people at the state for all of the levels of grant underneath CRISA and underneath ARP, just so the board aware. Even though we say CRISA and ARP, there's multiple tranches of grants that we were awarded under there. Under the rescue grants, we were awarded 4 grants. And under the CRISA, we were awarded 2 grants, but they're all falling under those legislations. So we had to talk to all varied people. So in the revised plan, here's the revised plan. It actually takes the federal, well, let me say what happened when I spoke to the state. It became clear from here that we're going to end this year with a surplus and we're putting money in reserves. So I said, well, look at that, maybe we can use our federal dollars differently. So in calling the state, if you remember in a prior slide, those grants run for 3 years. And unlike any other grant, grants are usually approved 1 year at a time. And if you have money you want to spend, it's called rollover dollars, and you have to apply, or carryover monies, and you have to apply to use those carryovers. These were not set up like any of those other grants. These grants were set up over 3 years. And while they approved our spending plan, they did not, it does not matter to the state what year we spend the money. Okay? So once we got confirmation from the state that we could revise the plan by year any way we want, the plan's been approved to use it. We're using our funds to support programs we already have in-house, which is mostly salary-based items. They said it didn't matter which year we used them. So it began, then we began to have these conversations that, wait a minute, we could revise the use of our federal dollars. And when I ran it through the long-range financial plan, here's what happens. We would only use $2 million of our federal dollars, and we would start moving $4 million to the 2 out years. The 2 out years are next year, and then the next year. Well, look what happens here. We do still anticipate that we'll have a surplus at the end of this year. That will give the board the opportunity, they approve a resolution every year letting us fund reserves. It gives the board an opportunity to decide to fund some reserves that they might be interested in funding. And I just want to add a little disclaimer that it is very early, this is very early in the year to truly predict, but do predict that we will have a surplus. It could even be a little more than this or a little less than this, but we do predict that we will have a surplus with revising our federal program. So what this does here, if you look here, it would move those surplus monies into reserves. And we said reserves are our friend, not our best friend. But what it does here, in the year that we're starting to see fiscal stress, if you notice that our unrestricted fund balance is not 7 million, 7.8 million, it's now 6.3 million. That's not, it's not we still have stress, clearly we still have stress, but it makes us have more flexibility. The less money in reserves and the more money you have in fund balance, the more flexibility you have in the future. So just by using the money over the 3 years differently, we improve our long-range outlook by about $1.5 million. And that's a positive because we will begin to have to build budgets with all of these considerations in at the forefront, not just waiting until that year to build a 26 budget knowing this. We will have to be very aware of this in the years prior to that. So that is the recommendation, is to move the use of the federal dollars and that will allow us, again, here's the same slide again, that allows us to come in at a levy of 175. We took $4 million, pretty much moved $2 million to next year and $2 million to the third year. Again, that's $108.35 estimated increase to the average household at 1.75%. And now we have next steps still. So the next steps are, we would approve the revised spending plans for CRISA. We'd approve the revised spending plans for our rescue dollars. We would approve the use of reserves and fund balance as they're presented in the budget now. And then additional next steps are, we would approve the spending plan. We would approve the 1.75% recommended tax levy increase. And we also have to discuss what's going to happen if additional state aid comes to the district. And basically the decisions fall into three buckets pretty much. We could move the federal grant funding to 23-24. As you saw, we were moving approximately $2 million to next year and $2 million to the year after that. Let's say we get another $100,000 in state aid. We can put $1.9 million to next year and $2.1 million to the third year federal dollars and use that $100,000 in state aid just to allow us to move the federal dollars to the third year. That's one option. We can, there's additional expenditures can be approved to be spent with that $100,000, or we could further reduce the tax levy. Those are the options with, if additional state aid comes in, we anticipate that by next week.
But that would be to be applied to next year.
It's part of this development of this budget. So if the board gives us direction on what to do with the additional state aid, we will know what to do. If the board is approving each of these other items and gives direction on the state aid, we'll know what to do with it if it comes in. And this is our.
I think you should go, stay on this, because I think the board needs to discuss this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And what you'd like to do, whether or not you would like to delete items or add items, before we even start talking about where the money's coming from or going to.
You said you want us to talk about deleting items or adding items?
Well, you have a spending plan before you that administration recommends,
Yeah.
but it's the board's budget, it's not administration's budget. So I think this is the time that you give us further direction on what you would like your budget to look like, and then at the April 13th meeting, when we come back to adopt the budget, we can have it prepared for you exactly as you would like it. We go back to the previous slide.
Yep.
So to get to that 175, you stick to next steps. I think it outlines it nicely.
Got it.
To get that 175, these are things you need to do.
Yeah.
And not touch the plan. So
And-
if you don't want to do that, then we have to make adjustments other places.
So I get that, but I really want to talk about how that affects us the years moving forward.
Okay.
So that's why I wanted to see that 10-year plan, because this is seems acceptable to me, but now how does that affect us 3 years later, 4 years later? What will we need to do to stop that, bottom line from being in the negative? The unrestricted fund balance.
Yeah, we have that.
I just want to speak to it both ways, with or without the federal spending plan change. And the reason why the box is highlighted in red, this is without a change to the original spending plan. Basically, if you look at year 2025, okay, when the red box is not highlighted up above, that is our federal dollars. You start to see at the very bottom, at the end of the year, well, let's look in the middle of the page where it says our deficit. Our deficit would be $9 million that year. Basically, we would be spending more than we had in revenue by the tune of $9 million that year. And I say that that's before a change. Now let's go to the next slide, which is literally if we change the spending plan, okay? Basically, do you see that the deficit is approximately the same, $9 million? And that's really, the revision in the federal grant spending doesn't change the fact that it's ending in 2025. And as in our world, we call that the cliff. It's one of the major sources of revenue declines, but your expenditures are still continuing. So let's say that the board is acceptable to the revised federal spending plan. So we stay on this slide. If you see up above in the top section, that is all the revenues for the district. And you see total revenues is a line item at the bottom, and you see percentages underneath them. You can easily see that our revenues this year are 2.86% increase. Next year, it's a 0.74% increase. It's a 0.15% increase in the third year, and then it goes down to a negative 1.89% increase in revenue. Well, revenue is, we must balance our budget. So then you go down below to the expenditure section of the house.
Ms. Kaiser, can you use the pointer for me?
Oh, yeah, sure, sorry. So these are our, let me just get a little closer. Okay, so these are the revenue estimated increases. They're based on the fact of a levy increases of this in the future. Okay, that has to be some assumptions. Some of the state aid increases down in the middle here. Building aid is exactly what we now know of since we spend so much time building our building aid out for the next 10 years. Those are exact numbers for the next 10 years. This state aid line right here is based on 2% increases in state aid in the future, okay? And I'm going to just add a little highlight. You may hear conversation at the state level that a due minimis increase of 3% is what's being discussed, but due minimis increases are only on foundation aid. Foundation aid is only $30 million of our 50 million. Expense-based aids are based on, you have to spend the money to get it, and expense-based aids are based on enrollment, and we are a district with declining enrollment. So we will never see a full 3% increase in our aid as our enrollment continues to decline. So this is based on state aid increases of 2%, so barring that the state doesn't change any formulas in how they provide aid, that's pretty much a reasonable estimate for our district. Building aid, as we discussed right here, this line, is exactly what we're going to get over the next 10 years with no change. And these are some estimates in some of the other items. They're minor revenue items. And so this brings us to the totals. You see the totals here. The growth in revenues, never one time in the next 10 years, grow at 3%. And look at our expenditures down below. These are our categories expenditures, as we talk about when we build our budget every year in those broad categories. You'll see our expenditures are literally growing at about 3% every year. Okay? You'll notice this year they're not growing. This year, I mean the budget we're building 1.21%. That is because we reduced our budget by $2 million through attrition. So that is addressed through here, that our budgeted our expenditures that we're anticipated to come in next year will decline next year. But after that, they continue to increase by their normal rates, and the rates are what are determined. It's actually off here on this document is all the assumptive rates. So basically here we have, we'll say for argument's sake, expenses growing at 3% a year, and we don't have revenues ever growing at 3% a year. Okay? The only place you close that gap is right down here in your fund balance. And right here, these 2 years right here, is when we begin to run into problems. And it's not a coincidence that those 2 years are exactly after the federal dollars end.
So the way I see it is the only way you stop it from affecting that bottom line is by increasing your revenues or cutting your budget.
And usually both of those occur.
Both of those. So the way I see it again is you have about until those federal dollars drop off to do that. Otherwise, you're going to be in that financial stress at the bottom.
And that is you're correct, and that is the beauty of this long-range financial plan, that we must always be cognizant and aware of what's coming and the cliff that's coming. Because the decision we make today will impact this going forward.
And that's why I wanted to talk about this before we talk about, what is acceptable and, what we want to do moving forward, because it's important that we see how it affects us when we do move forward. So I think that growth of, 3+%, to me is not something that we should really be aiming for. I think the goal should be to cap the growth at 2%. Whatever we do needs to be capped, because if not, it's not going to be sustainable. And I think that the 1.7% tax levy, with only cutting the budget $2 million from last year, what was it, $3 million from last year? 2 million, to me, I don't think that's enough. I think that I would say you have to cut the budget more and you have to go for a higher tax levy. And I think that we have to do it in a way so that drop off of federal dollars isn't, gonna hurt us as much as it looks like it's gonna hurt us now.
Yeah, I mean, the drop-off is coming no matter what, so
Yeah.
it's coming. It's coming, it's going to be real, it's a matter of we let it come and slap us in the face, or we prepare for it a little
We
bit
can
at a
prepare
time.
for a little bit.
And that's really the goal and the beauty of what this does. It shows if you wait till after 24, 25, and you address it then, it'll be very difficult season.
So can we begin to tweak this?
Of course,
Because I would like to do that.
sure. Bear with me, there's a slight delay because it's being projected, so it just takes me, it doesn't follow my analysis as much as I like it to be. But we're ready. Okay, I'm going to show the board first. Dan, can I show it a little smaller?
Smaller?
Yeah.
I was hoping you would say.
No, I mean, because I want to show it to you, and we can bring it in, we can, oh.
You can
that's a
zoom
problem.
in. Yeah, because
Let me
it's
just
very
show
hard
it
to
smaller
read.
first. I just want to show them how it's built so that they have a conceptual knowledge of what it even is. Okay, just for that, that's fine right now. I know things are X'd out just because of size. I just want to show the board
Might be
something.
easier to look at that one. Would that be easier for you?
What'd you say?
I was just saying to the folks on that side of the room, might be easier to
That's a
look
good
at
point.
that one. I'm seeing you all strained to look at this one, but it's right there.
You know, I'm not liking this. Hang on one sec. I'm trying to show you how it's built. You can't see my little carrot, but it's the delay to project it, so just kind of. One second. Not working. Okay, I want to show you something first before we start. Did you hear my frustration? Sorry.
You used to your desktop computer.
You took it out my computer.
Yeah.
No, you can blame me, it's because of the way that it's getting projected to YouTube now.
I was trying to help you out, Dan.
We wanted to be on YouTube the whole time, and that we knew there'd be a delay. We practiced, but it's the delay. Okay, just want to show you something, that to build a long-range financial plan, just so the board's aware, you first had to build, I built out 5 years of actual results for the district. These are our actual audit results in every category, and it's how I was able to tell what the standard growth rates are in revenue and expenditures across the whole district, and it's literally built out audit by audit, line by line. So that is the first step in building a long-range financial plan, is to get what your actuals are over a multiple period of time. So now I can hide it because it really drives some of the assumptive rates that I'm going to show you going forward. So I'm going to hide this. And then you have to build out, like we know that we've been speaking about where we might come in this year. It was just important because we're revising our federal spending plan of what that might look like, and to show the board that. But here to the right, this is a table. this table, you do see some numbers there, but some are blocked out. But this table right here is each line item, you can put in here assumptions that you would make as to where things will lie. So if Mr. Trent asks me to put in a tax levy increase for the 24 school year of, give me a number, Mr. Trent, that you're thinking of.
Tax levy number?
Yeah?
4%.
Okay, so if I put in a 4% levy number there, he's gonna actually see what that does. Dan, I guess we could put it into regular size now. Some graphs involved. So, what this is gonna do here, in 1 year, I'm gonna put in 4% and 4%. Seeing it big, make it a little, oh, you're working on it, I know, there's a delay. Okay, so if you actually see up above, I do have a cell that reads it, just so we know what we're talking about. A little bit bigger, Dan? Okay. All right, well, that's a little issue. I'm going to change the font so we can actually see it. No. Okay. So what happened here is, if you remember that we were going to have a $6 million deficit in year 26, okay? You now see that we still have a deficit, even at a 4% levy one time. We still have a deficit in year 2026 of $2.3 million. What that really means is we will not have $4 million to give to our budget. We won't have, it will be a loss of revenue forever as we build our budget going forward. And you can start to see that a change in the levy for any 1 year, it made that number go down significantly from 6 million to 2 million. If we additionally had a cut in expenditures, so let's say next year we reduce expenditures by, not next year, let's say in year, I'll make up year 2025. If we reduce expenditures by $1 million, and reducing expenditures means we have some programmatic change and those expenditures aren't there, whether it's attrition or we don't offer a program, they're gone. So in addition to that, a permanent reduction in expenditures is similar to raising your levy. So you now see that we almost don't have a negative unrestricted fund balance that year, almost. It still doesn't make it perfect, because look at the out year after that. The out year after that, we have a significant deficit still building. So these are significant revenue and expenditure decisions we're going to have to make, because they have to be permanent changes that are going to move us, going forward.
So if we're looking at permanent changes to reduce spending, taking advantage of attrition
Yep.
and so forth, but we also had the levy be more in the range of 4%.
Yes,
If you did that for a second and third year, could you let us see
of course.
what that does?
So one reduction in expenditures of $1 million, you still are actually at a $2 million impact on our long-range plan, because it's cumulative. It builds on itself, because it doesn't also grow at a 3% rate that other things grow at. So we start to see cumulative effects of those changes. Because it's not just cutting a cost, it's cutting the growth in that cost forever. So this is a 4% levy increase for the next 3 years. Give me a second. Okay, so if we go down to these years now and look at what happened, you actually see that although the number's red, it's not in parentheses, so it should be black if you were changing it now. We no longer have a negative unrestricted fund balance in that out year, in year 26. But we would still replicate that in year 27.
So we have to have more than 2% in that year, and then going forward to keep us from going down to the red again.
Yeah, we do need to look at it in the out year format, because if you notice, our revenue decline, our revenue growth is so limited in the future years based on estimates, that, and our expenditures are not limited. I know, Mr. Trent, that you talked about limiting expenditures. There's two ways: they either get reduced and then we address program issues, but just for statistical perspective, so the board is aware, the community knows 75% of our expenses are, people and benefits. 75%, and we may even be a little higher than that now, but I could do that, but that's what it is. So we have to be cognizant of that as we build our budgets in the future too.
But we still have the growth factor here the same untouched. You only reduce the budget one initial time, and then you just kind of hike up your revenues.
Absolutely.
Can we look at it capping our growth?
Yeah. So,
10 years, for 10 years?
So let's say that we capped our growth next year. I'll look at, you mean, you want me to do next year, like the one we're building right now?
We have to cap our growth 10 years, or as long as this plan goes in, is the length of this plan.
Okay. So this, I'll start in 2024, is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, so in 2024, capping our growth 1% is approximately $1,380,000 reduction. Make sure I take it there. Think I have an extra zero.
But a 1% wouldn't be realistic though when it comes to capping the growth, would it?
Well, that brings us down to a 1.97% growth rate, which you said 2%. That would be a reduction that year, in the 23-24 school year, of about $1,380,000. Okay, and you'll see down below, and that's if you couple that with a levy, and I'm going to adjust the. I'm going to do another 2% here. So that is 2 years of our growth capped at 2% and a 4% levy. We start to see with those changes, look down below, we're literally now have pushed out kind of our long-range plan into starting to really, we have to really start talking 26, 27, even 25, 26, but in 27, 28, we would have significant financial stress that year. But we have now pushed it out 2 years.
Do you, by any chance, know the combination of the cuts were made in those 2 years?
I brought our growth from 3% to 2% in each of the next 2 years. So in 23-24 school year, I reduced our expenditures by $1.4 million, and I reduced our expenditures in 24-25 by $1.4 million. Okay, and that can be attrition. That can be, other than attrition, it depends on what happens in those years. But in addition, just so that we're all on the same page and thinking similarly, when you're cutting expenses overall, you're also fighting the increase in expenses related to obligations that you have, retirement system costs, health insurance costs. So it's not a straight 1.3 or $1.4 million reduction. It's a net reduction of $1.4 million, which is much greater than, and it is you have to actually first grow your expenses by the things you know about. Every year, Usually, we see an increase in retirement system costs. Every year, we see an increase in health insurance costs. Those are going to continue. They decline when we don't have as many people covered, but the people that remain and are covered, we still have to pay those increased rates on. So I just want to make it clear that it's never like, oh, we have to just cut 1.4 million. It's first you deal with the growth, and then you have to have an overall cut of 1.4 million. So it could be growth of 2 million and cut of 3 million for.
Now, Ms. Gossett, did you cap the growth?
I did for just 2 years, just 2 years.
Can we continue that?
Sure, sure. So this would be.
And 1.4 million is 2% growth, correct?
If you see the bottom line, I'll use my pointer down here. I'm doing math in my head, but I'm trying to keep the growth rate at 2. That's all I'm doing. I'm doing it in my head while I'm here. I mean, I could do exact numbers, but
No, this is fine.
this is assumptive, so we're just trying to do it. So this is. Okay, so if you actually see, this is only going out 5 years. So this is 5 years. I'm gonna bring us down below now. Okay, so if we begin to see to the right here, we now are into 28, 29 with at least, we'll call it surviving without a negative unrestricted fund balance. That is growth in 5 years of expenditures at 2%, which is probably closer to, if I had to guess, that is closer to, we had to deal with growth and then cutting, but that's how it works, and a 4% levy for the next 3 years. So 4% levy and capping growth at 2%, that's where we end up in 28, 29.
But if you had the levy continue above 2%,
Yep, I can go out
What-
all of the years at about 4%, yep.
is there a way to balance that out so that we're not in the red down at the bottom at any point, that we can do this indefinitely?
Yeah, you know, some of the, yes, obviously, it's, we're going to, every year, we're going to adjust for actuals. We're going to adjust for state aid that we know of, because any more money that we get continues to grow past that point, at least on non-expense-driven aids, on foundation aids. So this is 5 years at 4%. Let's just look, because we have 5 years of expense growth and 5 years of capped expenditures. So where we are now, when we go down below, is we are at fund balance now. I'm sorry it doesn't look as pretty, but we want to be able to follow along. So if we look now, we're all the way out to 2031 with reserves and fund balance. I'm not saying we have a lot. In the 10th year, we still have an issue, but we have gotten out pretty far. You know, once you get past 5 years of the long-range financial plan, you know, it's assumptive, laws can change. We do know legislatively they're going to look at the foundation aid formula in general. So lots can change, let's say after 5 years, but you have to make assumptions. In our 10 years, lots of districts only look at long-range financial plans for 5 years, but our story is for 10 years because of the building aid and the bonds. So it's important that our story marries the building aid, you know, that we have to deal with this for the next 10 years. But here we are, so a presumed plan of 4% increases to the levy for the next 5 years, and a capped growth of expenditures, not capped, capped at 2%, which is really a reduction in expenditures. Because our average increase in expenditures is 3% a year. So we would be cutting, each year we'd be cutting expenditures, it gets deeper each time. And that's where we would be. We would be able to get pretty much through 10 years with fund balance and reserves.
So the 10 years that we have left on building aid runs out in which one of those years?
Okay, so building aid is right here, that's this line right here. And
And,
building aid,
and if you go back down, wasn't that one in the red?
well,
With, unless you raise the levy up at the top for 29 and 30.
You can't follow the colors now, Ms. Hayes, only because I had them red to show negatives originally, but now that we're using it interactively, you gotta follow just whether it has
Parentheses.
parentheses around it or not,
Okay.
correct. So red does not mean that, you will look for the parentheses. So right now.
That was what I was looking at out there in 32, but I noticed the levy up at the top.
It's only 2%.
Right.
And that is true, that is a levy at 2% after, this is assuming 4% for up until 2028, a capping of expenditures for 5 years or a growth cap at 2%. And this would bring us through 10 years, and we would then be done with all bond issues, and we would be in a different position. In year 11, which you're not seeing on here, which I will build on here for the future, it's a different story, it's just a long way off 11 years, because all of our debt then drops off. We have no more bonds at that point in time.
So you've only made a $2 million cut to the budget to begin this, correct?
For this year.
For this year.
Mhm.
Now, if you, let's say you cut the budget by an additional $2 million,
Mhm.
do you think that would drastically change the outlook of this plan?
If I.
This budget? If you cut an additional $2 million from this budget, do you think that would change the forecast of this?
Yes, because it's out for 10 years.
Because it's out for 10 years.
And it will drastically change
Program.
your program.
I can do it on this
Dismantle
sheet in a second, but the reality is someone has to come up with that $2 million in cuts.
That's a lot of programs.
That's a lot of
That's
programs.
a lot of programs.
To the point of looking at, I'm not gonna call them cost cutting, I'm gonna call them efficiencies. The legal increase was reported on slide number 12 on February 16th. When you showed budget codes 1,000 and 5,000, that's the presentation where there was a proposal to increase the legal fees. In that slide presentation too, that I just went back to look at, there were also in your different departments conferences. I'm assuming that is away conferences. Do we still have people going to, or do we have away conferences resumed now that the COVID restrictions
We
have?
just had an equity group go away on a conference, just recently, but they're not in full force they're coming back
Okay.
this year. People
Okay.
are going on conferences.
Because, that's another thing that's always the first to go from where I used to be. The conferences are the first to go. So, to know how much we do spend in conferences each year. Are those conferences available remotely? Or do we have the ability to have people come in to train on the conference matter? So I'd like to be able to look at that and have the board look at that to perhaps consider eliminating the cost for conferences. I'm not looking at cutting programs. I am looking to respect the collective bargaining agreement and what's negotiated. But we have to do it with this issue in mind. And so still for this year, I still think there are more avenues we could look upon to cut the budget. If we find $2 million, that'd be great, but I just think we could do more. And that's what I'd like to see I'd like to see that information provided for the board to consider.
I think one of the things that's coming out of this exercise for me, when you think about, and you just said, could we cut $4 million out of our budget? I think we need to understand that, we really can only cut it out of the 25% that we really control. It's not people without laying people off. That's almost 11% of that 25% is $4 million. That's huge. I gotta think that's.
Most of that stuff is mandated things, like contracted.
Yeah, I'm just saying, it just.
Legal work we have to do.
So I get your point, I almost feel like the way the state is, the way the tax levy law is and everything else is really what the injustice is here to some extent. And I think everything else is kind of spitting in the wind sometimes when you talk about, and I get the community needs to see this and that, but if we shave $1,000 off of, a contract, it's not gonna have an impact of what we're seeing here, and we can do that 20 times, it's still not really gonna have the impact we need. So I think that the issue is bigger than, can we sharpen our pencil here and there, because I get everything that Cameron's scenario is going through. I'm trying to figure out how a community who's completely confused based on some false information circulating in the community, probably, 4% isn't gonna float right now. And I don't know that it's gonna float in the future. So I'm thinking myself, how we're gonna get a 4% increase passed in the future while making these cuts. We're really in a tough spot. I just don't know how we're gonna get out of it, other than, because there is validity to it. If the community embraced a bigger levy increase, right? Hypothetically, let's just say the community said, hey, we're with you, go ahead and raise it 7.76%. Good portion of our problems go away in the long term, correct? It gets
They don't go
easier.
away.
It gets easier, because every time you cut, you're not cutting that year, you're cutting in the subsequent years because you can't build off of it. That's the disservice of the levy cap, and that's why it would be my hope, although I don't think it'll ever happen, that the legislature will actually look at it, because we're dealing with 7% inflation right now as well. All these things are creating a breaking point, I think, in school financing, and that's where the bigger issue, I think, comes in. Am I understanding it wrong?
But the issue that I see is that we're growing at a pace that we can't sustain when it comes to the revenues that we're bringing in.
You're right.
So we have no choice. You either go into the red very quickly with the plan that she has in the presentation, or you make some hard cuts and go for a risky levy.
Yeah, but I mean, what's a hard cut? I mean, that's what the question is, right? I mean, we have a district two towns over that hasn't had busing in 15 years. I mean, those are the types of cuts you're talking about. They're going to have an impact here, and I don't see the community supporting that. Either way. So I don't know where that compromise is. You're right. Listen, if we can find a cut that alleviates this going forward, that'd be wonderful. But the crowds come out. You start talking about busing. You start talking about cutting sports and arts and music. That's what you're talking about here. That's the reality of.
So if you're not making those cuts, then you're increasing your levy.
No,
Consistently.
understood. I'm just saying, what's the answer? I mean, because, I don't see a budget passing that doesn't have arts, music, sports, busing,
Do you see a levy passing at 4% with those things? So I think that is.
You know what, I'd like to say yes. I would hope that would be the case, but I would have thought 4, even 5% could have passed this year. But we've seen what's happened with false information. Whether it's circulating the community, whether Newsday, whether this Newsday writer can't get facts straight or not, we now have people who are still singing the 7.76 number, even though we've come out and said 1.75. And there's a lot of stalwarts in our community who are saying, vote down the budget. So where do we go from there?
I think that Ms. Costa needs to explain to us what happens if our budget is voted down.
Well, I tell you right now, I think everybody knows it's catastrophic.
But we need to see that. We need to see what that looks like.
I think I just described it to you.
But-
I mean, I get your point, but I'm saying, again, if it was easy to explain, the district's actually in a good position to increase revenues going forward, because we are not hamstrung by the 2% tax levy. The problem is, the community's not gonna pass the budget at the higher than the 2% levy.
So you have no
Based on the
choice
information.
but to cut
So,
the.
for me, what I would hope, Cameron, to just answer your question, what I would hope was, we get through this budget cycle, and I can't say I even agree with the 1.75 number, because I think if our original allowable levy without the exclusion was 2.36 or something,
0.29.
2.29, that's lost revenue forever. And I still think that number is very palatable to the community. Now they're at 1.75, we can't unring that bell. So I think that's the problem. What I would like to know, hope to do, is that we can follow through this plan at 1.75, and we can begin the conversation the day after this vote on long-term, and continue to educate the community about, we're gonna need to have projections and increase the levy going forward. We're coming out of a pandemic, right? It's even harder for people to understand a bigger number, but as things get better, it might be easier for the community if we spend more time educating them throughout the whole year and the subsequent years to accept a 4, a 5, maybe 1 year, you know, who knows what it is? You know, I think that's, right now, we're putting out a fire, and we can't repair until the fire's out.
But if we had 4% starting next year, going forward for the 10 years, while we still have debt payment to make.
You're saying instead of the 175. You're saying if we went on next year.
Next year for 10 years.
Okay.
And I thought there was another year
No,
out there
yes.
where I saw some twos.
I think you changed this year, right?
I did change this year. Did we not want to change this
Yeah,
year?
right.
No,
No,
not changed this year.
well, I think we've,
Okay, fine, let me,
Yeah.
I will take it
got
back
the 1.75.
Right, I
for
think
this
Ms.
year.
Costa just
I meant
misunderstood
the
as
year-
I'm watching
the
as she's
following
typing.
year.
Right.
Yep, I'm going out 10 years, but I'll fix this year. Just give me 1 second. This also still includes the expenditure capping. If you would like me to remove that, I will, so you can see what just a levy does. What would you like?
Just leave it in.
Leave it in for
Yeah,
now?
I think-
This is with
Just to-
expenditure capping 2 over the next 5 years. And that brings us to, let me go down here.
What was that 3? If you could scroll, see right,
3.85?
there's
Up
one
on top, over here, see,
in 2030,
see this up here? These are the levy increases that are.
right, but down in the middle, isn't that the expenditure?
Yes, but I only cap the expenditures for the next 5 years. And you see this 1.31%? This is, you know, we actually are seeing right here, you see the debt service payment, this line right here that I have highlighted, right here. You actually see this is the drop-off of the bonds from when we have 2 outstanding bonds. Some end in 5 years and some end in 10 years. This is the drop of the first set of bonds that end in 5 years. And then this bond will continue for the next 5 years after that. But this is the big drop-off, that's why you see the expenditure change here. That's the natural change in our debt service payment of those 20-year bonds, the first 20-year bond. So if we did still have a cap in expenditures for 5 years, but a 10-year levy at 4%, if we go all the way out to the right, we are, have no fiscal stress.
But those numbers look great. So I don't think that you necessarily would need to go that long with the 4% levy,
Yeah, I mean,
if your
it's-
growth is capped.
the growth is capped. Remember, if I take growth out of being capped, you'll see how that will impact that. Growth is a hard nut because you are, every year that you make a cut in your expenditure side of the house, you're going deeper and deeper and deeper. So if you cut 20 employees, next year, you're another 20, like you're going deeper each year. That's how, you know, cuts work. You have to go deeper just to keep getting that recurring cut each year. One cut's hard, like we have attrition now, we're losing that staff, that'll be gone forever. If we wanted to replicate that again, you have to see if whoever might retire, what our programs look like, what our student needs look like. It's complicated, and it's also kind of what we do. I always say, this is what I always say, everywhere I've ever worked, we do not have an expenditure problem. Growth of 3% of expenditures is not a problem in any organization. We have a revenue problem. And that's a revenue problem generated by lots of laws, the state, some of the complexities of how we get revenue. We have a revenue problem. But that doesn't matter. We still have to balance the budget at the end, and you're correct.
And to that point, I'd like to address this question to the president. This presentation is exactly what we need to present to the Brookhaven Town IDAs. This 10-year projection, to show how the pilots and the tax cuts to big businesses and incentive for keeping them there and allegedly bringing jobs here is hurting this district. Based on just what Ms. Costa said, we have a revenue issue. So that's something that we could,
But
you know,
But
work
if we
together.
are able to retain counsel to monitor all of this for us, because Right now, we
They
can't.
can still bill us hourly. I mean, I don't know how much council comes into this piece of it. I think there are other professionals that can guide us better, but I'm not saying we eliminate council. We can't do that.
Well, I'm not necessarily referring to our regular council,
Oh, okay.
but somebody with a particular expertise in those areas. That's what I had in mind.
Well, and that, certainly the money that we would be advocating for, the cost to get there could be offset by that additional revenue.
Ms. Costa, when we got the last list of pilots and pilot payments from the IDA, did we have the end date for those tax abatements on there?
We hadn't had it like a year or so ago, but we've pretty much gotten the end dates for all of them.
We do, and did we get that?
I think we put it in.
I think we've put in updates before, but.
I'm sure it is.
I
I mean,
can usually send you
I mean,
a
I
copy.
can, yeah, I mean,
can easily
if
send it.
either let me know when it was, just because I think the largest business up there has to be coming to an end very soon. It was extended, it was 10 years, then it was extended by 5 years. I have to think,
Are you talking Cadence?
no, Caithness is 25 years.
They end in,
They, yeah, but that,
27?
is it 27? But Quality King's the largest business up there. I think it's a $3 billion business, and I think they're now up to like $150,000 a year in taxes, where for many years it was about $30,000. But they're, and I'm pulling these numbers out of memory, so I'm probably off a little bit. But I do know, because I did go to the hearing for that, and I'm trying to think, that was an extension of 5 years when it came to the end. And I mean, I'm trying to think of the business official who was here, and I know who it was, so how long was Dr. Gerges here?
He was here for 5 years.
He was here for 5 years?
Because he got tenure in 4 and then he left.
That's right.
Am I right?
I have to think that one is coming to an end, because it was before him. So unless they got the extension before the first one ended, but, I mean, that would be, to me, because I understand the point, right, about the IDA and the revenue and everything. To me, it's about the companies that are there now. When they're done, they don't get extended. Because if we say, you can't give out the tax abatements anymore, which I would love, well, the companies just aren't gonna come, right? They're just not gonna build. They're gonna go build in the town of Islip or somewhere else. So we kinda have to decide, which one you want. Something's better than nothing. So, but to me, it's about making sure they don't get extended when they end.
So when did you say the Caithness in 25?
20 is 20, something like that. 2027, Ms. Costa just
I
said.
think it's 28 or 29.
I'm bringing it up right now.
It's a $7 million hole.
So,
But my understanding is that also factors into tax cap issues, because it goes toward the valuation of the
It does.
entire properties in the
Yeah.
town.
but I guess the question is when it, and I wasn't here at the beginning of it, but what does, what's their tax, they should go on the tax roll then,
No.
at the end. So, that's the stuff I'd wanna get. I can't imagine it's not gonna pay anything after that.
Before you go off that slide, Ms. Costa, you're showing between
I can
27
tell
and
you right now,
28.
Kate, what the pilots are. I just have the end years are not on this slide. I'm looking at.
That's all right.
No,
Right.
And you can just forward it, we don't have to spend
No,
too
but
much time on it,
Before you go
let
off this
somebody else.
slide,
Uh-huh.
there's a significant drop-off in revenues. No, go back up.
Yep,
No, because you're on,
I'm in revenue right here. This is revenues at the top now.
no, it was underneath. Yeah,
Okay,
all
hang on.
right, just go down.
Yep.
Maybe I was reading the line wrong. Go on, expenditures, budgetary revenues. Oh, that says reserves.
Reserve, this is the difference between, so here, this line right here, I'm gonna just go up, I'm just gonna pick this year that I'm on, 28. We have estimated expenditures of 153 million, okay? And if we go up, our revenues are only anticipated to be $144 million that year. So that is where we would stand. Just so you know, everybody, I did take out the capped growth. I just took out the capped growth as I was sitting here. So this would be, that 1 year, there would be an $8 million deficit.
There's $8 million deficit, and that's 28 or 29.
Yeah, I mean, this is a deficit each year, but I just wanted to show at a 4% levy and no change in expenditures other than the $2 million cut we made this year, we again begin to see fiscal stress just 1 year out in 26, 27.
So you have to.
You have to do
You
a
have to
combination of
control
everything. When
it.
you, first of all, we're gonna update with actuals as things change, as our budget changes. And we're gonna come at the end of this year, we know we're gonna add approximately 2 million to reserves. We've cut off spending with our budget builders out in the district. We will hopefully add a little more to it than that. And we'll be updating with actuals all the time. Hopefully the state gives us a little more building aid because that would change one of the numbers here. That's a permanent revenue source for us. So that would change that a little. And we start to tweak it for actuals each year. But you see, the main picture doesn't, I mean, it changes, but we need to make some structural changes, which are really a combination of revenue increasing and expenditure, looking at expenditures. Back to the pilot, just so everyone knows, we received $8 million in pilots, $6.5 million of that is Caithness alone. And I can bring you up exactly, Quality King is 123,000.
Yeah.
That's the one that,
That's the perfume company. They were at like 36,000 for a lot of years. I guess there was an
Who's the
escalation.
perfume company?
no, not
Quality
perfume.
King.
Oh,
No, they're home repair.
Construction.
They're home repair.
Am I saying
Roofing.
the one, that's not, I'm probably confusing the commercials.
You mean Amneal Pharmaceuticals?
No, it's,
Let me look what else is on here.
oh, jeez. I know you're talking about Quality King, the roofing, it's not,
That one was just extended.
Yeah, I don't see one that,
you have a list right there?
yeah.
Let's see. I'm gonna say it, oh, yeah.
Maybe it's the.
Quality King, it's right there.
That's the
You said
construction
that's the
company.
construction.
Yeah, but that's,
You said the perfume.
that company, I don't think that's, I think it's a coincidence. That construction company's not Yaphank, is it?
Yeah.
Then it's not?
They have a small outfit in Bohemia, but they moved their larger operation to Yaphank.
Who's the perfume
Which
company?
is in-
I'll figure it
still in
out.
our district.
Okay.
I'll figure it out. It's not Amneal. Amneal is a huge company, but that's, I'll figure it
Yeah,
out.
all right, so the majority of our pilots though are Caithness, and I can tell you when that rolls off. I have that saved. I think it's 27. Memory serves me right.
So, I just need to understand this one. If in 28, $8 million is all of a sudden taken out of that, that affects us quite a bit, doesn't it?
Well, the difference of our surplus and deficit in these lines, Mr. Parker, right here, these lines right here,
Yeah.
these are actual results, not budgeted results.
Not budgeted.
And it's actuals. And the difference on how we close every year is how our actual revenue comes in and our actual expenditures. It's different than the way you budget. It is a different philosophy to building a financial plan, because the difference is whether or not you're using your reserves or not, replenishing them or not. So each year, an attempt is to replenish or to use. You make decisions based on that. You know, you can't gather up reserves forever and not spend them. You have to have plans, but you also have to be aware when you get down here of when you're spending them down and you don't have them anymore. You can't wait till those days to come. You have to talk about them in advance.
So do you think it would be easy to replace that 8 million?
I think that any decision we make to reduce expenditures comes with a heavy heart every time. That was what I was saying.
Just a correction, it's King Quality is the roofing company. Quality King is the perfume distributor in Yaphank, $3.2
I stand
billion.
corrected, thank
That's
you.
that, I knew it was right, you guys, everybody.
We always thought it was.
No,
good.
King Quality is the roofing company. There's no way they're $3.2 billion. That's that gigantic building. It's the largest building up there. I think it's bigger than Amneal's building, but they're a $3.2 billion company. We just heard their tax responsibility is $124,000 a year. So, I mean, I know some homes in our community in Brookhaven and Belport Village that are probably paying $35,000 a year in tax. They're large, homes and everything else, but just, I don't know if they're bringing in $3.2 billion a year in revenue. So that's the one, like I said, that one, I'd like, did you say you had the end date on that there, or no?
I I do.
We don't take up too much time. It's getting late, but.
I'll send it home.
But I do want to know, because I have to think it's coming up.
Okay.
And listen, that's the egregious stuff on part of the IDA for me. They literally fenced in a yard for pallets and got 5 years on new construction. Like, that's what happened there. So, so that's where I am on it. I get, from the beginning, it's something or nothing, but to me, what happens when they end?
And when it ends, it affects our assessment rates. And right now, our assessment rates are pretty nice for us in this area. And how's that gonna be perceived to the homeowners when that changes?
The difficult part, let's talk about a very large one. We have one large pilot, and it's Caithness. If something happens with Caithness, I wasn't prepared, so I'll just talk about it, and we can always look at it in detail another time. But if you're looking at the tax cap calculation in your mind, it's 8 steps plus the exclusions. We always say that. One of the steps is, the top step is reducing by your pilots, and the bottom step is adding in your pilots back. So what happens there is, if you have something that falls off a pilot, the same way that we're seeing our maximum allowable tax levy go up to, I showed you 776 in the next 5 years, that will be approximately 12% of, in varied levels. When a pilot drops off and doesn't come back on, once you have a pilot, it does the same thing as the 12% that we're going to see. So what it does is that it goes back into the assessment roll, but we're capped. You can only get whatever the growth rate of inflation. You can't get what you want, what you think you can get easily. And it has a little tweak to it. The tweak is this. The denominator in our assessments in our community increases. So if our assessment denominator is $100 million, and it goes up to $110 million because we roll on a new property. So all assessments go back on. The rolls, if Caithness goes back on, yes, the denominator is less, which means in theory all homes would pay less because it's a lower denominator. This is like, I don't remember what grade these students learn denominators and numerators. They would get this. The educators had to third. Okay, so the denominator is going to increase, and our homes are going to actually see a reduction in their taxes because it's spread over a bigger denominator. But what happens is our levy, maximum allowable levy, goes up a lot. Let's say it would be 20% that year, 15%, but you have to be able to sell it to your community. Not many people have a Caithness like we do, where you have to sell to your community. We can go up 20% and you're still not going to really have an increase to your taxes. What happens to most districts is they can't sell the message because not many people have a Caithness. So their maximum allowable levy goes up to 20%, but over a much larger denominator, so the tax rate impact, like we always say what the cost would be to the average homeowner, the cost to the average homeowner wouldn't be that dramatic, but you have to get past the number that they see in the calculation. And the number becomes very difficult when you have in your community a Caithness, a LIPA power plant, these huge ones that when they roll off, they have a great impact to the tax cap calculation.
Like this year, when we saw the tax cap
You had the
levy
same shock.
calculation at 7.76, and it's like sticker shock, and jumping to conclusion that that's gonna be the increase in taxes when it wasn't, and it was never under consideration to do that.
Yeah.
We're gonna see down the road, if Caithness, for example, drops off, something along the lines of 12 to 20%?
I can do, but remember, I don't know what their assessed value is, so I'd have to know that. I know what their pilot amount is, it's $6.5 million. I can do a general estimate, but basically, the difference of a pilot rolling off is that, yes, you see a shocking number. Let's just say, for argument's sake, it's 20%. You have to sell that really 20% doesn't equal an increase to the homeowner. They're all going to see reductions in their taxes. If you
Because
don't
of
go
the
and
change
grab
in
that
assessment.
20%, because it changed the denominator of all assessed values in the community. And there's only a few districts like us that have huge pilots like that on our rolls, that impact is that dramatic. When I came here, I joked when I saw Caithness, I said, oh my God, that is a large pilot. When does that pilot end? Like, that was the first thing I wanted to know, when does that pilot end? Because that pilot has a huge impact, and lots of advocacy is done for all of our organizations, school boards, NISBA, school business officials, ASBO, on the pilot issue. And most schools don't even have anything like a Caithness on their rolls. So it is something that we have to also know how it impacts us, so we advocate the right way going forward. We advocate the right way for what we want to happen to Caithness as it moves forward, because it will impact us.
Guess we also gotta pay attention to what's going on in Nassau County right now too, right?
Well, I just was in with Dr. Gianni, showing him I follow the paper very diligently. I'm an avid paper reader, but I've been following the North Shore issue for years. And then when I came here, North Shore is like us. And North Shore at the Glenwood Landings has the largest LIPA power plant, and they are on target to lose a significant amount of revenue.
Nassau County,
forever, because
yes.
they're settling a lawsuit with, LIPA has been arguing that they pay too much taxes, that the plant is 70 years old, and that the plant, they're not using fossil fuel anymore, so they have settled. And the rumor on the street is they've settled for half, and half for them, they pay $30 million in schools, towards the school every year. So that's a $15 million revenue cut, and their budget's less than ours.
I was gonna say, it's a small district, right?
The budget's less than ours, the budget is less than $100 million. So they are going to have significant challenges as they move forward at North Shore School District, all related to the LIPA, a huge pilot, a huge thing on their books, and they're dealing with that right now.
So moving forward, question mark. I think that, as Mr. Pacini said, if we don't go for that 2-point-something%, that's lost revenue. But I do understand that anything higher than 2%, people may not support. So I don't know if 2% tax levy is a good idea. But I certainly don't want to lose revenue.
Understand?
I don't know how everyone else feels.
You want to go back to next steps?
Sure. The next step.
Are we done with this exercise with this slide?
We can do it a little better visually in the future. We were trying to get the community to be able to follow with us, but we're not out in the future. Okay, so here is the. Here are our next steps. First three next
Yeah,
steps.
so let's stay here first.
Mhm.
So administration recommends use of some of our federal money as well as use of reserves and fund balance. Is that something that the board would support?
I think given the circumstances we're in right now, that's a reasonable thing to recommend and for us to approve. I'm still very uncomfortable with what's down the road, looking at the projections and the uncertainties and the fact that we really are gonna have to get a tax levy raised, and going forward. It's not like just raising it 1 or 2 years. It needs to be almost in perpetuity at this point.
So this is that, the referendum, the extra referendum on the budget, on the ballot.
No referendum.
No, this isn't that.
No, the referendum would be the spending. Okay.
Okay,
So this is how we'll get to the balanced budget.
okay.
So the change of the CRISA money and the rescue money, and then the use of the reserves and fund balance, which is an increase from last year.
That's fine with me.
Do I
With-
have a good?
But with the understanding that we can't continue to dip into cut into the reserves
Of course.
on an ongoing basis, so. But for right now, to me, the recommendation makes sense. I wish there was some hope to have changes in revenue at the state level where they actually did something that made sense for school funding and not just Band-Aid approaches to adjusting things like foundation aid. But we don't have control over that. So I think for this year, this makes sense to me.
Ms. Costa, are you sure that we can't cut the budget further without affecting programs?
Yes. I mean, if you're talking about nickels and dimes, they're not gonna make, you could cut some nickels and dimes, but it's not gonna make it affect your budget.
But being conscious going into the year, looking at the nickels and dimes, which could lead to a surplus of, even if it's $10,000, that's still something.
We will continue to apply the techniques we normally do. We know when things should be completed for the year, and we can cut those, like, we know, what we can do each year to help see where our actuals are and start to recoup some money so that we are continuing to put money away as we are this year. We will continue the same processes, like cutting off spending for some of our budget builders. If you don't need the money in March, you may not need the money in June, so we will continue some of those practices. Those are good business practices anyway.
So do we have consensus to move off of the slide that this is acceptable?
So those three
Those three.
check boxes, consensus on that,
Yes,
everybody?
I agree, and I support what President Hayes says about, we do still need to look, and to the point that the superintendent makes, we do need to look at the nickels and dimes. My grandfather always used to say, if you watch your pennies, the dollars will take care of themselves. So,
Good point.
we just have to watch closer. We haven't examined the treasurer's report each month on a comprehensive basis. We don't even have the treasurer come in and give her report. So I just think we need to do something more to watch those nickels and dimes going forward.
That's a good point, Ms. Felice. I think that we do need to have the treasurer here presenting the report every month, just so we are constantly looking at these items line by line.
So.
It doesn't have to be 30-minute presentation. It could be a quick one too. But I think that, so we are always looking at it line by line, so we understand it.
I know I heard the board the last time that suggestion was made, and I think we have it on the next agenda to talk about when you want to do that. I think it's on the next business meeting.
Well, the last business meeting, we actually took the treasurer's report off because we were so late coming out of executive session. So last meeting, the treasurer's report that was there should be on the agenda anyway. And I don't know why we can't just start next meeting with her giving the report, or at least be here to answer questions about the report.
That I've said at the last meeting, the treasurer works for the board. If that's what you would like, we can certainly do that.
Well, you have two people who are
Yeah,
suggesting it now.
absolutely.
I don't know if
I don't
the
see
others
why it
agree.
would hurt.
I think it would give us an opportunity to understand better how much work our treasurer does and how meticulously the records need to be kept in order to have generated the internal audit reports that we get that don't show significant issues. So I think for an educational purpose, I'm happy to have that training right there.
Yeah, it's one more step before we adopt the budget. One more step that we're taking to do our due diligence.
Thank you. God bless you.
Let's go for it.
We'll have her here. Okay, you want to switch that next slide? Okay, so obviously the third one, we do not need to decide now because quite frankly, we don't even know if we're getting anything. That's something you can do on the fly or adopt the budget meeting. Okay.
And we have to because we don't know.
Because well, you could right now say that, one
Assume
of
what
these
we
two
have.
things, move it to the federal money, additional expenditures. You could decide that now, but quite frankly, you don't know what it is.
Yeah.
So that's something we can waive.
Okay.
The spending plan is critical, because it'll affect the tax levy. So is administration recommendation something that the board has consensus to approve, or do you want to make changes to that plan?
I think I'll let it. We'll do it.
And
I'm gonna do with it.
it's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So by doing that, you in effect approve the 1.75.
Okay.
So we will come back to you April 13th with our adoption budget presentation, which will reflect what we talked about today. And we will know about state aid additions at that point, because we do believe that the budget will be on time with the state this year.
Mm-hmm.
However, we don't expect to get much, if anything. Okay. Administration has what they need, and there's no further items for discussion.
All right.
We'll move along with the meeting. Thank you, Ms. Costa, that was excellent.
Thank you.
presentation.
Thank you, that was really comprehensive. In two ways, meaning broadly explained and also understandable.
We'll get that conference money information in the update.
Thank you.
Okay. I think we'll move on to the,
Oh, fine, I sit all day, so I understand it.
we're moving to the public commentary part. And this is where we offer 3 minutes per speaker to talk to us. But our approach here is for us to listen, not to have an exchange. So we have one card, and we also have on tap a letter that was sent in that the clerk will be reading, correct?
Excuse me.
Yeah. You ready?
No,
Are you ready?
I
Okay. First speaker is Gregory Maglino.
That was the most bizarre 2.5 hours I've ever spent in here. I can see how we're broke. We're in financial bad straits. Clearly, there's some issues with fiscal management. After reading the material put out for tonight's meeting, it's become more evident why we have a perceived financial problem in the district. I'm trying to spin a narrative that explains how at least $20.6 million dedicated to paying for bonds has disappeared. The district points to a flyer from February 12, 2008, indicating that there's a mismatch between what people were told versus what they got. That's slide 2. Unless the people in 2005, 6, and 7 had a time machine, slide 4 clearly shows that by December of 2007, $63 million had been spent on bonds aggregated over 20 years. On 3 separate occasions, so as your own presentation shows, it is clearly impossible that the flyer in February of 2008 could explain actions from 2005, 6, or 7. Instead, what starts to paint is an understanding of the finances is slide 5. In June of 2005, the district discovered it had a budget deficit and no fund balance in either restricted categories or unrestricted. We sought permission from New York State to float a $4.6 million note to cover this. It was a 5-year note that the district paid off in 3 years. In 2008, the district was hit with 2 unexpected increases. First was the MTA tax, and then a huge increase in the district's share of teachers' retirement system and the employer retirement system. Both suffered big losses in the stock market and required local municipal agencies to make up the differences. While many districts laid off teachers and other staff, South Country did not. Instead, we began to structure our debt in a manner that would strengthen our reserves, take advantage of our unbelievably good fortune of 95% aid for projects, while not beating up the taxpayer, laying off teachers, or reducing programs. Our strategy worked so well that Moody's, the industry standard for evaluating municipalities and private industry, in June of 2011 upgraded the district rating to A1, and here's what they said. Improved financial position, strong balance sheet restored given the return of structural balanced operations. Today's upgrade largely reflects material improvement in the district's financial position over the past 4 years, as is evidenced by a return to structural budgetary balance and healthy improvement in reserve levels. In slide 12, we are shown an amortization of actual 20-year payments made by the bond, 15-year payments estimated, and what New York State has paid us in aid towards the bonds. As of fiscal year 2021, New York State has paid $126,398,095. The district, though, has only paid out $105,778,746, leaving a surplus of $20,619,349. Where's this money? These are dedicated funds that can only be spent on the bond issues. When you couple that money...
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for your comments.
I have provided the clerk with a copy of this and all other stuff. I'd like it to be included in the record. Okay, thank you very much for your time.
You want to read the next comment?
This is from Sarah Cologne. Hello, I am writing again to respectfully request that the school district and our Board of Education keep the remote learning option for the 2022-2023 school year. This program has provided students with special circumstances an equitable way of learning in an environment best suited for their needs. I urge that the data of the success of the students in the program be released so that a proper decision can be made based on the facts. We do not know what the future holds, pandemic or otherwise. However, we have an option that is working for those that actually need it. It is working for the students it is servicing. The remote program through BOCES should just be another area of study that we offer to students that truly need it. This is about education. Every child deserves an education, but we are giving that education to all students in a fair way. I fear for the students and families that have significant health issues if they have no choice but to send their children back into the buildings. What happens if the infection rate climbs again? What will our district offer to those students that truly need to stay home for health reasons if a remote program is not available? Any family that is requesting remote remain in place has legitimate reasons for that request. What is the district's answer? And I will also make mention that homeschool is not the same. We should be giving the education to these students. Maybe we should have inquired to those families that are currently in remote if they would need or want to continue the program. I feel that removing a remote option that has given an equal education to these students would be a complete disservice to them. Not everyone or everything is a cookie-cutter situation, and in the past, these students' situations were fixed with home instruction, which is the most restrictive environment for any student. Again, I ask the district and the board to line the figures and logistics up side by side. Compare the established remote program, its cost, success, and commitment agreements to the entire year with the cost, successes, and logistics of home instruction tutoring, where we need to find individual teachers for each student individually should they exercise their right to ask for home instruction given their health or other circumstances. Yes, we are dealing with a hard budget time. However, educational programs should have been the last thing on the chopping block. Please, please keep the remote program available as an ongoing learning option for students that need it. It is the right thing to do. Best regards, Sarah Cologne.
Thank you. So now we have, we're moving on to closing remote, another part. Okay, we have one more speaker, again, 3 minutes, and it's Amy Price.
Hi, I'm going to be picking up where Greg left off. When you couple that money with the $11,438,962 the state still has to pay us, that means there is $32,058,311 that should be available to pay the balance of $47,415,475. That's only a $15,357,164 difference over 10 years, or $1,396,106 a year, or roughly a one-time increase of less than 1% or 140 a house. But based on the internal audit showing a $33 million surplus that we're sitting on in reserves right now, there should be no increase to the taxpayer. The only problem with that is that $20.6 million in surplus funds that should be available for bond debt is not anywhere on the balance sheet. Most of the surplus money is in restricted accounts not related to the bonds. This district doesn't have a revenue problem, it has an accountability and spending problem. If you don't properly place money where it's supposed to go when it arrives, then when you need it, you don't have it. Stop trying to spin your way out of this situation. 3 of you on this board have held the position of president over the last 10 years. You claim there's no communication from board to board. Do you guys not even talk to one another? I can tell you that with the exception of Ms. Felice, not one board president from this current board has ever reached out to ask for historical background on any matter. I can assure you that all members of this board I served with did their job. It's time that you do yours. By the way, unless Caithness has extended their pilots past 2027, your projected budgets after this time are going to be short $8 million. So you might want to adjust that.
Thank you for your comments. All set? Any closing remarks?
Nothing, thank you.
Nothing for me.
None?
No, just the material that was submitted to the clerk, that will be distributed to
Copies.
to the board. And if the superintendent could answer some of the questions that were raised in the letter.
Okay,
Okay?
sure.
Thank you.
We're gonna get that in the update, or?
I can email it directly to you in the morning. or
Sure, yeah,
is
that
okay?
works.
Yeah, I'll take a hard copy, I mean, digital copy. That's good.
Okay. Motion to adjourn, Mr. Trent, second, Mr. Parker. All in favor? It's unanimous.